Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. It happened last November, a little after 10 at night. I live just outside of Taos, New Mexico, about 15 minutes out, where the houses thin out and it's mostly sagebrush and dirt roads. It's quiet out here. Most nights, the only sound is the wind through the fence wire and the coyotes if they get bold enough to come close. That night, it was cold and still. No wind, no traffic on the highway, just this heavy quiet that happens after the temperature drops. I was inside watching something dumb on TV when my dog, Murphy, started barking from the back door. He's a rescue, part shepherd, part something else, and usually doesn't bark unless someone's close to the property. At first, I thought it was a coyote or maybe one of the neighbor's goats that had gotten loose again. I muted the TV, and that's when I realized how serious his barking sounded. Short, sharp bursts, his hackles all up. I got up and went to the sliding glass door. He was standing on the porch, staring straight up. Not at the yard, not toward the fence line, straight into the sky. I didn't see anything at first, just stars. Out here you can see a million of them, especially on a cold night with no moon. I stepped outside, thinking maybe he saw a plane or one of those low satellites that pass overhead. But it wasn't that. He was locked onto one specific spot, dead still except for the barking. I told him to knock it off, but he wouldn't even look at me. I followed his gaze, and that's when I noticed it. A faint light, almost like a shimmer, in the exact spot he was staring at. It wasn't bright, more like a soft, diffused glow. At first, I thought it was a star behind thin cloud cover, but there were no clouds. The sky was perfectly clear. The glow pulsed once, just a little brighter, then dimmed again. I squinted and tried to focus, but it didn't behave like anything I'd seen before. It wasn't moving, wasn't blinking like a plane. It just hung there. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, it faded away. Murphy stopped barking immediately. His ears stayed up, but he went silent. Then he looked at me, back at the sky, and gave this low, uneasy growl. I stood there another minute, watching. Nothing. The sky was back to normal. I figured maybe it was a trick of the eyes. Cold air, dry night, maybe some atmospheric reflection or something. Still, it bothered me. I walked down to the edge of the yard, past the old wooden gate, and looked again. Same patch of sky, totally blank. That's when I noticed how quiet everything had gotten. No crickets, no distant dogs, no traffic hum from the highway, just dead still. It wasn't something I noticed right away. It just crept up on me. I went back inside and tried to settle down, but Murphy stayed alert. He paced between the sliding door and the window for the next half hour, whining softly, tail down. I finally let him sleep inside the bedroom, which I never do because he sheds everywhere. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to him whining again. Not barking this time, just low, nervous sounds. I looked over and he was sitting up on the bed, staring toward the window. I listened, but there wasn't any sound outside. No movement, no lights. The digital clock said 2:13. I started to roll over when something flickered across the curtains. It wasn't a car passing or a flashlight beam. It was too diffuse, too soft. Just this faint light moving across the window, like a reflection from something distant but close enough to cast across the fabric. I froze, waiting for it to repeat. It did twice, a few seconds apart. Then nothing. I got up and pulled the curtain back a few inches. The yard was dark. Porch light off, security light near the barn still on. But beyond that, nothing. I left the curtain cracked and sat there watching. Murphy didn't move. I swear it felt like the air was thicker than normal, like something pressing down on the whole property. Not heavy, exactly, just strange. After about 10 minutes, I gave up, turned the light on, and went to get some water. Murphy followed me into the kitchen, tail tucked. When I looked out the sliding glass door again, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The security light by the barn, which is on a motion sensor, was flickering, like something was moving back and forth under it. There shouldn't have been anything there. That light only comes on if something crosses within 15 feet of the barn door. I stood there watching it blink on and off, trying to make sense of it. The timing wasn't random. It was too steady, like something passing rhythmically through the sensor's range. After maybe 30 seconds, it stopped flickering. Then, just like that faint light earlier, it went completely out. The yard went black. Murphy growled again, but he didn't move from my side. I opened the sliding door just a crack and stepped onto the porch, holding my phone flashlight low. The wind had picked up a little by then, carrying that dry dirt smell, but otherwise everything looked normal. No movement. Then I noticed it again. The faint glow up in the same patch of sky as before. Not bright enough to light anything around it, but steady this time. I stared for maybe a full minute. It didn't move or pulse. It just sat there, motionless. Then, right when I thought maybe it was a star or satellite I hadn't noticed before, the glow dimmed and blinked out completely. When it vanished, every light on the property came back on. The porch, the barn, even the little LED on the water pump shed. All at once. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I walked the property, checking for any sign of animals or people. The dirt near the barn was undisturbed. The motion sensor was fine. Everything looked exactly the same. The only weird thing I found was Murphy's water bowl, which I keep under the porch. The surface of the water had this thin white residue, almost like fine dust. I dumped it and refilled it. That evening, around dusk, I called my neighbor Troy, who lives about half a mile down the road. I asked if his dogs had been acting strange or if he'd seen any weird lights the night before. He hesitated for a second, then said his wife had woken him around midnight because their dog was barking at the back fence just nonstop for several minutes. When he went out to check, he didn't see anything, but he mentioned something odd. He said it looked like the air above the pasture was glowing a little. He thought it was distant lightning, even though there hadn't been any storms. After that, nothing else happened. No more lights, no hums, no barking fits. Life went back to normal. 2 weeks later, though, I found something that made me think about it again. I was out by the barn, replacing a section of fence, when I noticed a small patch of the ground, maybe 3 feet across, where the dirt was discolored, lighter, almost ashy looking. The grass around it was fine, but that one patch looked like it had been bleached somehow. I poked it with a stick, half expecting to find something buried, but it was just dry soil. No smell, no heat, nothing unusual except the color. Murphy wouldn't go near it. He walked a wide circle around and stood behind me, whining softly until I gave up and went back inside. I haven't seen that glow again since, but sometimes when I let him out at night, he'll stop halfway down the porch steps and stare at that same spot in the sky. Doesn't bark anymore, just watches, quiet and still, like he's waiting for something I can't see. I woke up around 5:30 a.m. like I usually do, when the sky's that gray blue before sunrise and the air has that damp, earthy smell. I live on the edge of a small town in western Maine, a little property with a big garden I've been working on for years. Tomatoes, squash, peppers, a few rows of beans, some herbs, and the perennials around the edge. I keep the garden fairly organized, but nothing I do is particularly neat. It's all slightly uneven, human hands all over it. That morning I couldn't sleep for some reason. I rolled over, glanced at the clock, and noticed a strange quiet outside. Not the usual early bird birds or the soft hum of the neighbor's tractor. Just silence. My cat, Milo, was curled up beside me, twitching his ears, looking restless. I got up, grabbed a sweatshirt, and wandered outside, expecting to check the mail or feed the stray birds. The air was cool, thick with fog that hung low over the field behind the house. That's when I saw it. The garden. I froze in the grass before the rows, my breath fogging in front of me. It was rearranged. Perfectly. Like someone had taken a ruler and straight edge and measured everything out. The bean rows curved into arcs I'd never planted. The tomatoes were aligned into triangles. The peppers were in perfect hexagons. Even the perennials around the edges had been shifted slightly so that every corner formed a geometric pattern I didn't recognize. Nothing was missing. Nothing was crushed. The dirt was undisturbed except for the plants being bent subtly into these impossible shapes. I walked closer. Milo ran ahead, sniffing around, clearly unsettled. I checked the soil, pressed my fingers into it. Firm, dry, in the sun-dappled spots, soft where it had been watered the night before. No footprints, no tire tracks. Just the plants, perfectly shifted. I started talking to myself, softly out loud. Okay. Maybe I dreamed this. Yeah, maybe I was sleepwalking or something. I'd been sick last week, low-grade fever, restless nights. Maybe it was that. I shook my head and walked around the perimeter, inspecting everything. I know my own patterns. I know the mistakes I make when planting. This wasn't that. This was too precise, too careful. I checked the compost pile. Nothing out of place. I looked toward the back field, thinking maybe someone had wandered onto the property. The fog was thick enough that I couldn't see more than a few feet beyond the garden. No footprints, no signs of anyone. Then I noticed something else. A faint glimmer on the leaves. Sunlight hadn't fully broken through yet, but there was this odd sheen, like the morning dew was catching in angles that shouldn't exist. I leaned closer and realized the bends in the leaves were uniform. Every plant curved in the exact same direction within its pattern. No random drooping, no wind-blown chaos, just precision. I stepped back. Milo hissed at something behind the tomato trellis. I spun around. Nothing, just the fog curling around the fence posts. I walked slowly to the edge of the garden, thinking maybe I'd see some clue, broken branches, footprints, anything that made sense. But there was nothing. The surrounding grass was untouched. No soil compression, nothing that suggested a person or an animal had come in. I took my phone out, started filming, just the rows, the arcs, the triangles, the hexagons, everything bathed in that gray morning light. Milo stayed close, his tail low, ears flat. I whispered to him, it's okay, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. After a few minutes, I stopped recording. I walked around the patterns again. I reached out and lightly touched the tomatoes. They bent without resistance. The beans curved beneath my fingers like they'd been trained, like someone had pressed them down and they had memorized the shape. I pulled my hand back and noticed my fingers felt tingly. Nothing painful, just a strange vibration that faded after a moment. I went inside to make coffee, hands shaking a little. When I looked out the kitchen window a few minutes later, the fog was starting to lift. The patterns were still there, the angles still perfect. I put on some clothes and went back out with the sun fully up. I called my neighbor, a retired teacher named Claire, to see if she had noticed anything. She didn't answer, which was unusual. I called again later, texted her, nothing. I spent the rest of the morning documenting everything, photos, notes, sketches. My back hurt from bending over the plants. By noon, the sun was fully out, and the garden looked normal in a way. From a distance, the patterns were still clear, but up close, the tangle of leaves and stems blended into the usual mess of a working garden. I tried to convince myself someone had been there, careful, fast, early in the morning. But no, there was no way. The dirt was undisturbed. The plants weren't broken, the arcs were too clean, the triangles too sharp. That night, I slept in the living room, lights on. Milo was restless again, pacing. When I looked out the window, the moonlight fell across the garden, and I swore the plants looked different. Not moved this time, but aligned in a way that seemed almost deliberate, subtle, like the air itself had bent them. I couldn't explain any of it. I didn't tell anyone for weeks. I went back to the garden each morning, expecting some kind of repeat, some clue, something tangible. Nothing ever happened again. The plants grew normally, harvested normally, but the memory of those perfect, impossible patterns stayed. I've thought about it constantly. Who, what, or how. Sometimes I'll be watering the garden and my hands will hover over the rows, careful not to touch anything. Milo will sit beside me, staring toward the field. I don't feel like the garden belongs entirely to me anymore. Something else passed through, left a mark too precise for human hands, and I'll never know why. Even now, when I drive home at night, I glance out the window at the property, past the edge of the driveway, past the darkened field, and I think I see shapes in the shadow of the plants, lines and curves that my eyes can't fully resolve. I look again and nothing's there, but I know what I saw. The metallic clicking woke me up. I sat up and mouthed, "Maya," half asleep, half angry at being pulled out of a dream. She pushed the tent flap aside a crack and whispered my name. The sound was repeating, a short, high, rhythmic click, like someone tapping a pair of coins together at regular intervals. It wasn't from the stove or the camp lantern. It had a tinny quality, as if it were coming from thin metal being pinched and released. We'd been in Red Horse Canyon for 2 nights, the kind of place we chose because the road drops away and the nearest cell signal is that little sliver you remember you had once. It was supposed to be simple. Hike a few miles, set up camp on the little bench that looks down into the wash, drink cheap wine, sleep under an absurd number of stars. The first night was the kind we brag about afterward. Clear, cold, the Milky Way big enough to make you dizzy. Now the clicks kept time. Maya crawled out of the tent barefoot, and we stood in our sleeping bags with headlamps off because light felt disrespectful in that moment. Our breath fogged in the cool air. The canyon held its shape around us, the rust-red walls, the scrub, the high, bare sky. I reached for my jacket, more out of habit than cold. "You hearing that?" she said. "Yeah." I hadn't realized how loud my heart sounded until then. When I moved toward the tent door, the sound changed pitch slightly, like it tracked me. That made me stop. We both froze. Juno, our rescue mutt, was quiet, which is the opposite of normal. She'd slept through our talking gear around for hours, but now her ears were up and she crouched low like she wanted to make herself small. Dogs, to me, are a better barometer than any app. If they're weird, you should pay attention. I unzipped the flap and stepped out onto the flat. The light from our extinguished lantern had left a pale semicircle on the dust. The clicking was clearer now, coming from above, I thought. It wasn't random rain on rock or a branch rubbing. It was mechanical in rhythm and in tone, like a watch winding slowly. Maya pointed up with the corner of her eye. "Look." When I looked up, the stars were gone. There was no sky. Instead of pinpricks and familiar constellations, there was a surface, smooth, diffuse, and softly glowing. It moved. It wasn't a solid disk, more like a huge sheet of some pale material, luminous and unbroken, drifting slowly east to west above the canyon rim. It blocked everything, not only the stars, but the faint band of city light on the far horizon that I usually could see. The color wasn't white exactly. It was soft and cool, the sort of gray that went slightly toward blue. We stood there like idiots, mouths open. The clicking continued in the intervals it had before, but now it sounded farther away and colder. Up close, it still had that metallic tick to it, but the cavity of sound came from somewhere along the edge of the glowing surface, like a tide of tiny impacts just out of focus. I tried to be reasonable. The first thing I thought was wind turbine or a hang glider with lights. There are hikers, people with big flashlights. Maybe it was a collection of lanterns someone had strung together. None of those ideas fit. The surface was too uniform and it was drifting with no visible means of propulsion. No red LED strobes, no engine noise, no blinking. The canyon is wide and open. If something had been this big and mechanical, we should have heard a motor. Then something else happened. Everything around us muted. The scrunch of Maya's jacket, the small squeak of Juno shifting her weight, even the soft rustle from a distant brush, they all softened until there was almost nothing. It was not silence, because I could still hear the clicking and a faint, low hum that I hadn't noticed before, but the natural sounds were gone. No insects, no wind. There was a pressure in the air like the moment just before a train passes, only stretched and placid. "Phone?" Maya asked, like a superstition more than help. No bars. My watch showed the right time, but the second hand stuttered like it lost rhythm for a beat. My headlamp felt thin in my hand. When I pointed it at the glowing surface, its beam dissolved, stopping a few feet above us as if someone had painted a ceiling in the sky. The cool light from whatever it was washed the tent in a pale glow without casting real shadows. I reached into the cooler for the little AM radio we'd packed. Maya calls it her desert comfort, and fiddled with the dial. It clicked, then only hiss and that faint low tone under it. For a split second, something like a word or syllable rolled through the static, but whatever it was had no shape I recognized. Maybe it was interference. Maybe it was my brain inventing language out of noise. It felt like it matched the cadence of the metallic clicking, but moved under it, deeper and slower. Maya whispered, "We should go." Her voice trembled in the way that told me she was thinking it, not just saying it to calm me. We'd come out here to sleep in the open. We were not prepared to pack up in the dark at 3 a.m, but the surface overhead put a weight on patience. We pulled our shoes on slow and grabbed headlamps. Juno leapt into the SUV like she knew the drill, nose pressed to the window. I flipped the engine. The vehicle coughed, like a dry throat. The dash lit, the radio chimed dead, then nothing. The key turned and the starter clicked once, and the engine did not catch. I felt foolish for expecting modern machines to behave when things like this happened, but rationality has a way of pulling at you. I tried again. Same answer. The clicking overhead synchronized in my head with the starter's attempts, like a cruel metronome keeping a time the car refused to follow. Maya tried her phone. Black. No signal. She went to the glove box and fumbled for the little complete map she'd printed, thinking paper would save us. I watched the glowing surface above as if that would tell me what to do. The surface drifted closer to the canyon lip, and along its edge, a row of darker points moved by. They weren't lights, they were dim and regularly spaced, like very distant rivets. We decided not to argue logic. We unhitched the tent, shoved the sleeping bags and the cooler into the back, and started the 40-foot walk to the SUV with headlamps. Every step felt like it took place under a different clock. The clicking kept its rhythm. The low hum grew into a vibration you felt in your teeth and feet, not loud but inescapable. When I turned back at one point, a stupid, human move, the surface had a tear in it, a long, thin gap that moved like a seam being opened. Through that seam, I could see a darker layer beyond. Nothing like a starfield. It was deeper black and seemed to have its own slow texture, like oil and water slowly being swirled. We got into the SUV and tried the key again. It started this time with a pop and a lurch that felt like a cough catching. As the engine idled, the glow overhead thinned. Maybe it was the warmth from the running engine, maybe it was coincidence. But the seam drifted closed, and the surface thinned as if someone were lifting a veil. The metallic clicking stopped within one loop, and the low hum faded to half its former strength. I drove out of the clearing before dawn like someone leaving a party early because the music changed. My hands were tight on the wheel. The canyon walls receded, and the sky above the rim finally cleared back into stars. The first streak of morning looked ordinary enough that I laughed, a short, dry sound that wasn't happy. Maya breathed out and said, "Did we imagine part of that?" As if testing whether memory was a shared object or private. At the sheriff's station, we told the deputy about the clicking and the surface and the way our phones and the radio went odd. He took notes, asked the usual questions. Who else was out there? Did we see lights from the highway? Any drones? We walked him through our route, what time we'd set up, what time we'd heard it. He and the dispatcher promised to check trucker logs and call state forestry. Probably campfire, someone with a generator, he said, which is a useful thing to say because it makes the world feel explainable. We didn't argue. On the drive home, the day had the ordinary weight of errands and coffee. The canyon sat behind us like an image in a photo, flat and small. I tried to get back into the routines of work, paying bills, answering messages. That night, we put the tent back in the attic. The sleeping bags went into the dryer like they'd been sick and needed airing. Sometimes, when the sky is quiet and I'm up late washing a pan, I hear a mental echo of the metal tapping. I look up at the stars and check that they're there, dots in the same places my father taught me. I don't try to find explanations. We left the canyon with the tent packed and the cooler empty, and one very ordinary photograph taken at dusk where, if you squint at the right pixelation, the sky there seems a touch smoother than it should be. I keep thinking about how ordinary things went wrong for a little while. Electronic nonsense. A starter that wouldn't turn. A radio that hummed like it was trying to say something. None of that adds up to proof, but it adds up to an experience that sits in the back of my skull and refuses to fold flat. I was lying on the hood of my old Jeep, blanket under me, beer in hand, staring at the sky. It was one of those crisp, clear nights in northern Idaho, the kind that makes the Milky Way look like someone spilled sugar across the heavens. I hadn't planned on staying up late stargazing, but I had some time, and it was too nice a night to sit inside. My name's Tyler. I live out near Coeur d'Alene, not far from the National Forest, so the sky is mostly dark and empty except for stars. My neighbor's lights don't reach out this far, and there's hardly any traffic once it gets late. Everything's quiet. I was scanning Orion, just letting my eyes wander when I noticed it. A tiny pinprick of light moving in a straight line across the sky, too small to be an airplane. I thought maybe it was a satellite at first, but it wasn't moving like one. Too slow, and its path was oddly deliberate. I shifted a little, squinting. It kept moving in a straight trajectory for maybe 20 or 30 seconds. Then it stopped. Just stopped. Hovered in place. I could see the stars behind it. No blinking, no noise, nothing. And then, without warning, it reversed. The exact path it had traveled before, mirrored perfectly. I caught my mouth halfway through a laugh. Satellites don't do that. Planes don't do that. Hell, birds don't do that. I sat up on the hood trying to get a better angle. The air was still and cold, the kind that makes your breath fog in little puffs. My eyes darted over the Milky Way, trying to see if there was anything else. But it was alone. No sound came from anywhere. No engines, no wings flapping, just this small light, tracing a path back over itself, like it had a purpose. I grabbed my phone and tried to record it, but by the time I opened the camera, it flickered and moved in little jerks. Not smooth like a plane or satellite. It almost felt alive, like it was watching me notice it. I held the camera up and tracked it for a few seconds. Then it vanished. Just gone. No blink, no fade, like someone switched off a flashlight. I leaned back against the Jeep, trying to shake it off. I've spent a lot of nights out here, and I've seen plenty of planes, helicopters, meteors, satellites. Nothing had ever moved like that. I checked the area around me. Trees swayed slightly in the wind, and that was it. My ears picked up nothing unusual. I tried to rationalize it. Could it have been a drone? Maybe some kid messing around. But it was too high for a drone to be visible like that, and there was no sound. The nearest town was miles away, and it was a school night. Couldn't be fireworks. They don't move against the stars, and they don't trace perfect mirrored paths. I decided to get closer to the forest edge, hoping maybe a better angle would explain it. I walked down a dirt path, leaves crunching softly under my boots. The forest smelled damp, earthy, like it had rained earlier. I kept glancing up, but the sky was empty. No lights, nothing. Just the stars. As I reached a small clearing, I saw a deer standing maybe 20 yards away. It froze and stared at me, ears twitching. Then it bolted into the trees, leaving the clearing eerily quiet. The only sound was the wind in the pines, and then I noticed something else. The air felt heavier. I don't know how to explain it. Like a weight pressing down, but not physically. Just an awareness, almost like the space around me was aware I was there. I shook my head and turned back toward the Jeep. That's when I noticed another light, very faint, almost invisible against the stars, hovering. It pulsed gently, white, almost like a slow heartbeat. I froze, trying not to breathe too loudly. It didn't move, just hovered there, pulsing. I blinked, and it seemed closer, then farther, then still. It never made a sound, never blinked like an aircraft. I wanted to call someone, tell them to look, but the thought felt wrong. Like calling attention would change something. I debated getting my camera out again, but my hands were shaking, and I didn't want to miss a second staring. It wasn't fear exactly. It was unease, confusion. That quiet dread that comes when something makes sense in no possible way. I stood there for what felt like a long time, watching it pulse when the first light, tiny, symmetrical, moving against the stars, appeared again, higher, tracing the same mirrored path it had before. My heart was pounding now. I could see it more clearly this time, just a pinpoint. But steady, deliberate. It paused mid-path and then went back. Exactly the same as before. I realized I'd lost track of time. My phone said it was just past 10, but it felt like hours. I could see the condensation on the Jeep windows from my own breath. I hadn't moved. I hadn't heard anything but the wind through the trees and my own breathing. The second time it reversed, the faint pulsing light above the trees blinked once. Just once. I swear it was like a signal, but it was impossible to interpret. I stepped backward slowly, keeping my eyes on both lights. When I turned fully to retreat, the lights were gone. The first one vanished mid-path again, no trail, no fade. The pulsing one above the trees blinked again and then disappeared. I walked back to the Jeep, feeling exposed, small, like the air itself was holding its breath. Nothing made a sound except the occasional rustle of leaves. When I got in, I started the engine, half expecting something to appear behind the Jeep, but the road was empty. The mist had rolled in again, thin and cold, obscuring the edges of the forest. I drove back slowly, checking the sky constantly. Every time I glanced up, it was just stars. I made it home without incident, but I couldn't stop thinking about the way the first light moved, paused, then mirrored its path perfectly. How could something do that? How could it move with purpose and then reverse perfectly? Nothing I knew of could behave like that in the sky. I've looked at the footage I got. Most of it is just grainy black sky with a few bright pixels that could be anything. Some frames show something moving, but it's nothing definitive. I've shown it to friends, engineers, pilots, anyone I trust. They shrug. Satellites, drones, reflections. None of it fits the motion, the pause, the perfect reversal. I've gone back to that clearing a few times. Sometimes I see faint lights in the trees at night, faint pinpoints of white or amber, but they don't move like before. Sometimes, just as I settle down to stargaze, the feeling comes back. That subtle weight, the quiet awareness around me. I don't know what I saw. I know it wasn't a plane, drone, meteor, or satellite. It wasn't fireworks. It moved with purpose, paused, then retraced its path in exact symmetry. That's all I know. I've tried to explain it, rationalize it, but nothing fits. I haven't gone stargazing alone at night since then. Not really. I keep my binoculars in the Jeep, sometimes glance up when I pass the clearing, but I haven't seen the moving light again. And yet, I can still feel the pull of that night. The way it made the air heavy, the sky deliberate, like something was watching, waiting for me to notice it. I was hiking alone near Lassen Volcanic National Park last summer, early August. I'd planned a 3-day solo trip, nothing extreme, just a few backcountry trails and 2 nights of camping before meeting up with friends in Redding. I'd been doing solo trips for years, so I wasn't nervous about it. I liked the quiet, and the park's backcountry had this eerie stillness to it that I found calming. That first morning started clear and cool, mid-60s, light breeze. I was maybe 5 miles from my campsite, cutting through a section of mixed pine and meadow where the soil turned sandy. Around mid-afternoon, I stopped to fill my water filter at a creek that ran shallow and slow through the trees. That's when I noticed it. About 20 yards upstream, maybe 15 feet off the bank, there was this perfectly round patch in the dirt. It caught my eye right away because of how precise it was. The rest of the ground was uneven, scattered pine needles, tufts of grass, a few rocks. But this spot looked like someone had pressed a giant stamp into the earth. It was about 12 feet across, perfectly circular, and the soil inside was completely flat and bare. At first, I thought it had to be a tent site or maybe an old fire ring, but there were no signs of people, no footprints, no ashes, no tire marks from bikes or anything like that. The vegetation around the circle was untouched. It wasn't burned, trampled, or flattened, just the circle itself, smooth as concrete. I set my pack down and walked closer. The soil inside was compacted but not hard. When I ran my hand over it, it felt slightly warmer than the dirt around it. Not hot, just oddly warm, like it had absorbed sun differently. The edges were sharp enough that I could see where one pine needle ended halfway over the line and then continued into perfectly flat dirt. I crouched there for a few minutes, trying to come up with a reason for it. Could have been a park project or something with the rangers, but I'd never seen a spot like that before. No tire tracks meant no heavy equipment. No scorch marks meant no fire. I was already taking a few pictures of wildflowers and the stream, so I pulled out my phone and took a couple of shots of the circle too. My phone showed full signal, odd for where I was, but when I tried to take a short video, the screen froze mid-recording. I backed out, reopened the camera, and it went black. I figured it was just the glare or a bug. A few minutes later, when I started walking again, I noticed how quiet it had gotten. The creek noise was still there, but everything else, birds, wind in the trees, insects, had gone silent. It wasn't gradual either, it was just gone. I tried to brush it off, but the silence stuck with me. Every step I took felt louder than normal, like the forest was holding its breath. I made camp that evening about a mile away from the creek. The stillness had lifted by then. Birds were back, normal forest sounds, but my phone still wouldn't play the video I'd tried to record. The screen would flash white for a second, then show an error. The pictures came out fine though, at least I thought they did. When the sun went down, I cooked dinner, read a bit, and turned in around 10. The sky was perfectly clear, stars bright through the tree gaps. I was almost asleep when I heard something. It wasn't footsteps exactly, more like a faint humming, really low, coming from the direction of the creek. At first, I thought it was wind through the branches, but it had a tone to it, like a single note being held. It wasn't loud, but it carried evenly through the air. It would fade for a few seconds, then come back. I sat up and listened. The sound had no rhythm, no pattern. It just pulsed in and out. Then I noticed something even stranger. My headlamp, which I'd hung on the center pole of the tent, started to flicker. Just one quick dimming, then back to normal. I thought the batteries were low, but when I switched it off and back on, it was fine. The hum went on for maybe 5 minutes, then stopped completely. The forest went quiet again. I waited for a while before finally lying back down. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning was normal. I made coffee, packed up, and decided to head toward a ridge trail that looped back to my starting point. I stopped once more at the creek to refill water, half hoping the circle would look different in daylight. It didn't. It was exactly the same, maybe even smoother. The dirt still looked freshly pressed, and not a single footprint in it, even though I knew I'd walked right up to it the day before. I squatted near the edge again, and as I leaned forward, I heard the same faint hum. It was there for maybe 2 seconds, like a quick vibration under the ground. The sound wasn't coming from any direction. It felt like it was coming through the air itself or even through my chest. I backed away, grabbed my pack, and decided to keep moving. About 3 miles later, I reached a clearing where my phone finally picked up steady signal. I checked the photos again, and that's when I noticed something I hadn't before. In one of the shots of the circle, there was a faint distortion over it, like heat shimmer, except it was cloudy that day and cool. The rest of the photo looked normal. I zoomed in, thinking it was just a blur, but the distortion had shape. A dome, almost invisible, like the air above the dirt was bending light. I didn't stay much longer after that. I finished the loop, reached the trailhead by late afternoon, and drove into town. My phone battery, which had been around 60% when I left the creek, was suddenly at 5%. That night, I stayed at a small motel in Chester. When I plugged my phone in and tried opening the video again, the file was gone, just deleted. I hadn't touched it since the day before. A few days later, I showed the photos to my friend Hannah, who works in environmental surveying. She thought it might be a sinkhole beginning to form, or maybe something caused by mineral deposits under the soil, but she admitted she'd never seen a circle that perfect. She asked for the GPS coordinates, so I gave them to her. She texted me back a week later saying she'd gone out there with her team. According to her, the area was normal. No circle, no flattened dirt, no sign that anything had ever been there. She said the ground was slightly softer in that spot, but everything looked natural. When I scrolled back through my photos later that night, the ones of the circle were still there, but the distortion was gone. The images looked totally flat, like the heat shimmer had been erased. I don't really talk about it much anymore. Every now and then when I'm hiking and come across an odd clearing or patch of ground that looks too even, I stop and look for a while. I always tell myself it's just nature doing something weird. But that circle, the silence, the hum, the way the air seemed to change, it didn't feel like any kind of normal I've ever known. It's been almost a year now, and I still can't figure out what I saw out there. I was driving home from Denver late one Thursday night around 11:30, heading west on US 285. The fog had rolled in thick somewhere around the Kenosha Pass area. Visibility was down to maybe 50 feet, and the air smelled damp, like wet asphalt mixed with pine. I'd been on the road for hours, coming back from a work conference, and I was running on caffeine and frustration more than anything else. I remember thinking I'd never like driving through this part of Colorado at night, in weather like this. The lines on the road seemed to vanish into the mist, and the mountains were barely visible silhouettes. My headlights barely cut through more than a few dozen feet, and I kept my speed down to maybe 35. It started when I noticed lights in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was another car, maybe some idiot tailgating in the fog. The lights were two bright points, yellowish, steady, no blinker or brake light activity. I figured I'd give them a few seconds and maybe they'd pass, but they didn't. I slowed down. The lights slowed. I sped up. The lights sped up. I checked my side mirrors and glanced back. Still nothing on the road, just two glowing points hovering maybe 20 to 30 feet behind me. I tried to reason it out. Could be a reflection of my own headlights off some reflective sign or guardrail. But nothing in the fog was reflective like that, and the position of the lights didn't match anything on the side of the road. I tapped the brakes lightly. The lights mirrored the action, slowing almost instantly. My heart started to beat a little faster. This wasn't normal. I was alone on a foggy mountain highway. The road was winding, barely anyone drove this late. And these lights were behaving like they were attached to me. I tried a few maneuvers. I swerved left into a slight pull-off, just big enough for a car to squeeze into. The lights swerved too, almost perfectly parallel, staying 20 feet behind me. I stopped completely, foot on the brake. The lights froze in place. I held my breath, watching the mirror. Then I blinked, and when my eyes opened, the lights were gone. Just the fog, the road ahead, nothing behind me. I thought maybe they'd gone around a curve, or the fog had swallowed them. My chest was tight, but I forced myself to keep driving. Every time I glanced in the mirror, I half expected them to reappear. A few minutes later, on a straight stretch past Trout Creek Pass, I noticed something else. My headlights caught something reflecting faintly in the fog, maybe a mile up ahead. It was hard to tell, but it looked like lights, maybe the same pair, floating in the middle of the road. I slowed, squinting, trying to make sense of it. Then I realized there were no cars, no objects on the road. The lights didn't shift like headlights passing over guardrails or trees. They just hovered, mirroring the road's slight curves. I slowed more, and the lights mirrored me again. I nearly hit the guardrail, trying to keep both eyes on them and on the road. I thought about turning off the highway, maybe pulling into a gas station or rest stop, but I was in the middle of the mountains. Nothing for miles. The fog made it worse. Even the signs and mile markers were barely visible. I drove cautiously, trying not to panic. The lights stayed with me for maybe 20 minutes. Every time I glanced back, they mirrored my speed. Every time I stopped, they stopped. Every slight turn, they followed. It was precise, unnatural. I tried to rationalize drones, some weird experimental vehicle. I'd read about those experimental military drones that could hover and follow, but this was nowhere near any military facility I knew of. At one point, I tried a risky maneuver. I stopped completely on a straight stretch, then reversed about 50 feet. The lights reversed with me, keeping the same distance, perfectly synchronized. My stomach sank. Whatever it was tracking me. Then I blinked again, just a normal blink, and when I looked up, nothing. No lights, no movement. The fog was still thick, but the lights weren't there. I slowed, heart pounding, looking around, trying to spot anything that could explain it. The rest of the drive down through the foggy stretch was uneventful. I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting them to pop back up, but they didn't. I reached the lower valleys near Fairplay just as the fog began thinning. The road opened up, and the lights never reappeared. When I got home, I told myself it had to be a trick of the fog, a reflection of my own lights bouncing off something unseen, maybe a signpost or wet guardrail. But the precision of how the lights followed me, stopped when I stopped, mirrored my every move, doesn't fit with any kind of optical illusion I know of. I tried to tell a friend about it the next day, a guy who spends a lot of time on these roads. He laughed and said, "Fog does weird things, man." But he hadn't driven through the same stretch at night in thick fog. He hadn't experienced it the way I did, perfectly synced, responsive lights that seemed almost aware of me. I went back up that stretch a few weeks later during the day to see if there was anything reflective I'd missed. Guardrails, broken glass, mirrors, anything. Nothing. Just normal foggy mountains, trees, and asphalt. No signs of any light source that could have done what I saw. I don't know if anyone else has reported similar things on that stretch. I haven't heard anything, and I haven't asked around too much. The experience feels personal, like a strange interaction I was meant to have alone. I've driven through that area at night since, in the same fog, hoping to maybe see it again or make sense of it. Nothing. Not a light, not a reflection, nothing. But sometimes when I drive alone at night, I swear I catch a faint glow in the rearview mirror, just at the edge of my vision, and my chest tightens the same way it did that night. It's been months, and I still think about it. I can't explain it. I don't know what it was, but whatever it was tracking me, aware of my movements in a way that doesn't make sense. I survived. I got home, but every time I drive through foggy mountain roads now, I feel watched, and I keep my eyes on the mirrors, just in case. I was driving back from a work trip in eastern Oregon, heading home to Boise. It was a long, empty stretch of highway, somewhere between Vail and the Idaho border. Two-lane road, no traffic either way, just darkness and the sound of my tires on the asphalt. I'd left a little later than I planned, around 10 p.m., and by the time this happened, it must have been close to midnight. The temperature had dropped, and the windshield was starting to fog around the edges. I had the radio on low, one of those small-town FM stations that play classic rock mixed with farm reports. Static came and went, depending on the hills, but it was company. I'd been on the road for a couple hours with nothing weird at all, just the usual. Occasional deer eyes flashing in the headlights, a few roadside mailboxes, the soft glow of distant farm lights miles off. I remember checking the clock, 11:52. Right after that, the radio started acting up. The music faded, not static, not fuzz, just this low, drawn-out hum that came through all at once. It wasn't loud, but it was deep, like a vibration more than a sound. I thought maybe the signal was dying out or I was in one of those dead spots, but when I turned the volume down, it didn't go away. It stayed steady and low, somewhere under the range of normal hearing. I turned the radio completely off. The hum was still there. It took me a second to realize it wasn't coming from outside the car. It was the car. The sound seemed to vibrate through the steering column, through the floor, almost like something mechanical was resonating at the wrong frequency. I slowed down and rolled the window halfway down, thinking maybe it was the road surface or wind. Cold air rushed in, and for a moment the sound dropped, but only for a second, then came back, steadier this time. It was too even to be anything natural. I've driven enough back roads to know what tire noise, wind, or drivetrain vibrations sound like. This was different. It wasn't random. It had a rhythm to it, slow and deliberate, like someone playing a tone in pulses. I coasted for a bit, keeping one eye on the road, one on the dashboard. Nothing looked off. RPM steady, no warning lights. I hit the radio again, switching through stations, AM and FM both. Every channel was just that same low hum. That's when I noticed something strange outside. Out ahead, maybe a mile or so, the stars looked weirdly sharp, like the sky had cleared even more. There was one in particular, right above the road, brighter than the rest. I thought it was a plane at first, but it wasn't moving. Then, after maybe 5 seconds, it blinked. Not a flicker like a star normally does, more like an actual light turning on and off. It blinked again, perfectly evenly spaced. On, off, on, off. Each flash matched the rhythm of the hum I was hearing. I let off the gas completely. My car rolled to a stop right in the middle of the highway. I didn't even think about pulling over. There was no one else out there. The sky was clear, full of stars, except that one. It was low, just above the horizon, dead center ahead of me. It kept pulsing, soft white light, then dark, like it was breathing. The hum got a little louder, or maybe it just felt louder because the night was so quiet. My ears had this weird pressure to them, like when you're in an airplane climbing too fast. I sat there, engine idling, and the blinking continued. I decided to get out. The second I opened the door, the hum stopped, just cut off completely. The air felt heavy, though, still and thick. I looked up again. The light was still there, but now it wasn't blinking, just steady. That's when I realized the radio hadn't been the only thing that went weird. My phone, which had been sitting on the passenger seat charging, was off. Dead screen. I tried holding the power button, nothing. I even unplugged and replugged the charger. Still nothing. I stepped a few feet from the car. The only light was from my headlights, and that star, or whatever it was, hanging above the road. It started moving, not fast, just drifting upward, perfectly straight, like it was climbing vertically into the sky. Then it stopped again. I felt that hum come back through my chest, even though there was no sound this time. My whole body felt like it was vibrating slightly. I got back in the car. When I closed the door, the hum faded again, but not entirely. The radio still wasn't working. Neither was the phone. I started driving, slow at first, then faster. The light didn't follow me, exactly. It just stayed above the road ahead, same distance, same height. Every time I crested a hill, I'd expect it to disappear behind the horizon, but it never did. It just hovered, pulsing faintly now. I tried turning off my headlights for a second to see it better. When I did, the entire dashboard dimmed more than it should have, like the power dipped. I flicked the lights back on immediately. At some point, I realized I'd been gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands hurt. After about 10 minutes of this, maybe less, maybe more, the hum finally stopped completely. I could hear the tires again, the normal road noise. When I looked back up, the light had vanished, just gone. I turned the radio back on, and it picked up a normal station right away, mid-song. My phone rebooted itself a few seconds later. The time on it said 12:41 a.m. I thought that was off because it didn't feel like I'd been sitting there for almost an hour. When I got home, I checked the clock on the kitchen stove. It said 12:38. So I guess it wasn't off after all. The next day, I mentioned it to a guy at work who used to do long-haul trucking. He said sometimes power lines or substations can cause weird interference like that. Thing is, there were no power lines along that stretch, just fields and low hills for miles. That weekend, I drove back out that way in daylight just to see if there was anything I missed. Radio towers, wind turbines, anything that could have explained it. There wasn't. I pulled over at the same spot where I'd stopped that night. It looked completely ordinary, just asphalt, gravel shoulders, and sagebrush. But when I turned the ignition off, I thought I heard it again, just for a second. The faintest low hum, like something deep underground. Then it was gone. I didn't stick around after that. I got back in the car and drove home with the radio off the whole way. For months afterward, whenever I drove that route, day or night, I couldn't help but glance at the same patch of sky. There's nothing special about it, just stars and open air. But every once in a while, when the conditions are right, one of the stars seems a little brighter than the rest. And I swear sometimes if I stare long enough, I can see it blink. I started hiking that morning around 8, later than I usually do, because I'd stayed up way too late working on some reports for the conservation job I have at the state park. It was early May, the sun just starting to burn through the morning haze, and the air was cool but heavy with humidity. I had the whole trail mostly to myself, which I liked. Nobody to dodge, nobody making noise except the occasional crow or the rush of the creek along the path. My name's Sam Turner, by the way. I'm 32, live alone in a little cabin not far from the trailhead. Nothing fancy, just enough space for me and my dog Gus, who follows me on every hike, sometimes annoying the hell out of me, but mostly just keeping me company. I was a few miles in when I noticed the first odd thing: shadows. I was walking past a stand of young maples when I glanced down and realized Gus's shadow didn't line up with him. I stopped, thinking maybe my eyes were tired. The sun was filtering through the leaves in weird patterns, flickering. But then I noticed it again. My own shadow, cast long across the leaf litter, started twitching and shifting in ways that didn't match my movements. My arms stayed at my sides, my legs moved normally, but the shadow stretched and bent like it had a mind of its own. I froze. Gus looked at me, ears perked, tail down. He didn't bark, just stared. I shook my head and muttered, "Okay, probably just the light." Tried to move again. Footsteps normal. Shadow still moving independently, drifting a little off to the side like it was exploring the trail on its own. I stopped completely, held my breath. The moment I did, the shadows froze. Everything, my shadow, Gus's, the branches above, frozen like a photograph. But it wasn't the usual stillness. The air itself felt heavy, like the kind of silence where your ears ring a little from the absence of sound. I could hear the creek faintly, but it was muted, muffled. My heartbeat sounded way too loud in my own ears. I started walking again, slow, careful. Shadows moved again, trailing my steps with a delay, sometimes bending toward the trees as if trying to blend in. My skin prickled. The hair on my arms stood up. I thought about calling someone, Claire, my coworker, but there was no signal here. Typical, but still. I stopped at a bend in the trail. Light filtering through the canopy hit the ground in a dappled pattern, and the shadows, They started to gather, almost like they were sliding together into a mass. Not darkening exactly, more like a soft smear across the leaves. I took a step back. Gus growled low, something he almost never does, and I felt the first real pang of fear. I took out my phone to check the time, hoping that some sense of normalcy would snap me out of it. 9:43 a.m. I muttered to myself, "Yeah, it's fine. It's probably just shadows." But I knew I was lying. Even as I said it, I knew this wasn't right. I kept walking, faster now, but still careful. The trail curved around a small ridge, and that's when I saw something else. A shadow that shouldn't exist. It wasn't attached to any tree, any rock, or me or Gus. It hung in the air a few feet off the trail, moving lazily along the path. I froze. Gus barked, the first sound breaking the heavy quiet. The shadow vanished instantly, leaving the air feeling dense, like the atmosphere had weight I couldn't shake. I kept going, trying to rationalize. Morning light, weird moss patterns, tricks of the trees, all of it. But when I glanced back, my own shadow had somehow moved ahead of me along the trail, then stopped. It waited, not perfectly aligned, just there. Watching? Maybe. My stomach churned. By this point, I was breathing hard, heart hammering. I considered turning back, but the path looped, and heading back would put me in the same patch of woods that had first shown the strange shadows. I figured I'd push forward, try to get to the ridge where the sun would be brighter, and maybe things would make sense. I took another step, and then I felt it. A weight in the air again. Not pressure, exactly, but a density that pressed against my chest. The usual sounds of the forest, birds, wind, the creek, were almost gone. Even Gus's nails clicking on the dirt felt muted. I glanced down, my shadow lagging behind again, swaying slightly, not my movements. I swear I saw the shadow crouch, as if sizing up the trail ahead. I stumbled forward, trying not to panic. I thought about turning my phone camera on, recording, but the instant I pulled it out, the shadow snapped back to normal. Gus growled, low and urgent. Something about him, he's usually fearless, made my skin crawl. I made it to the top of the ridge. Sun hit the trail directly, and the shadows seemed to behave normally again. I sank onto a rock, shaking, trying to calm down. I looked around. Everything looked normal. The mist in the distance, the trees, the way the sunlight filtered through the leaves. Nothing seemed out of place except the memory of those rogue shadows. I stayed there for maybe 20 minutes, just staring, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. Eventually, I started walking back down, slower this time, eyes on every flicker of light and shade. By the time I got to the trailhead, the shadows were normal. My own, Gus's, everything lined up perfectly with the objects that cast them. At home, I double-checked the cabin windows, the yard, even Gus's fur for some residue or mark. Nothing. No footprints, no evidence, just the memory of shadows that moved like they had their own will. I called Claire when I got back. She laughed at first, said maybe I needed more sleep. But I could tell she didn't believe me, not fully. I didn't care. Since then, I've avoided that section of the trail in the morning light. I stick to the wider paths where shadows are predictable. Sometimes at night, I'll see movement in the corner of my vision. I'll glance down, and my own shadow seems a little too long, a little too independent. It snaps back when I focus, but the memory doesn't fade. I still hike with Gus, still work in the park, still live alone, but I can't explain what I saw, and I don't know if I ever will. Shadows aren't supposed to move on their own, not like that, not deliberately, and yet, that morning they did. It was early October, just after the first cold snap of the year, when I went camping alone up near the San Juan Mountains in southwest Colorado. I'd been there plenty of times, a little spot near a stream just off a dirt service road about 5 miles from town. My name's Eric. I'm 37, and I've been camping since I was a kid. I don't spook easily, but that night I came closer to packing up and leaving than I ever have before. It had been a long week, and I just wanted to get away from everything for a couple of days. I got to the site around 4 in the afternoon, parked the truck under a cluster of pines, and set up my tent near the fire ring I'd built years ago. There wasn't another soul out there. No tire tracks, no voices, no distant generators. The air smelled like cold dirt and pine sap, and you could hear the stream about 50 yards away. By sundown, I had a small fire going and a pot of chili warming on my little camp stove. The temperature dropped fast, down into the 30s once the sun dipped behind the ridgeline. I layered up, cracked a beer, and watched the flames. Everything felt normal, peaceful. I remember checking the time around 9:30. The fire had burned down to coals, and I was about ready to turn in. I walked a few feet from the site, turned off my flashlight, and just listened. Nothing but the faint rush of the stream and the occasional snap of wood. No wind, no insects, just dead calm. That's when I first heard it. Faint, deliberate footsteps in the leaves behind me. Slow and steady. I turned around, shined the flashlight toward the tree line. Nothing. Just the beam bouncing off the trunks and undergrowth. The sound stopped the moment the light came on. I told myself it was probably a deer or raccoon and went back to the fire. Sat for a few minutes, then heard it again, this time from the opposite side of the clearing. Same slow, deliberate pace crunching through leaves. I stood up, light in hand, and turned toward the sound. Again, nothing. The moment I pointed the flashlight, silence. It went on like that for a while. I'd hear footsteps circling the campsite, not running, just a steady walking pace, always staying just far enough out of sight. I tried calling out a few times, half joking, asking if someone was there, but there was never a response. Around 10, I doused the fire and got into the tent, thinking it'd stop once I went quiet. I zipped the flap and lay in my sleeping bag, listening. A few minutes later, I heard it again, this time closer. Crunch, 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 circling the tent, slow, measured steps. It would pause for a few seconds, then start again, maybe a few feet over. I held my breath and grabbed my flashlight. The sound was right outside, maybe 2 feet away. I flicked the light on and unzipped the flap fast. Nothing. Just the empty clearing. The trees stood still, not even a hint of wind. I stepped out barefoot, swinging the light in wide arcs. The dirt around the tent was undisturbed, except for my own boot prints from earlier. No tracks, no movement. The sound had stopped completely. I stayed out there for maybe 10 minutes, shining the light into the woods, but there was nothing. No eyes reflecting, no rustle of brush, nothing. I went back inside, zipped the tent again, and lay there trying to calm down. I told myself it was some small animal, maybe multiple ones, moving around and stopping when I came out. But it hadn't sounded like that. It had sounded like a person walking. I finally started to drift off when it came back, even slower this time. Circling again, deliberate and heavy, like someone pacing. Every so often it would stop, dead silent, then start again from a different spot, as if it was walking in a wide loop. I whispered to myself, nope, grabbed the flashlight again, and flicked it on. Silence. I didn't move for a full minute, listening. Then, from way out in the trees, I heard the faintest crunch, maybe 100 feet away, like something retreating. I kept the light on until the batteries started to dim. When I finally shut it off, I couldn't tell if the sound stopped or if I'd just gone numb to it. I didn't sleep much after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard something brushing against the tent fabric. So faint, I wasn't sure if it was real or in my head. At some point, I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes again, it was early morning. Pale light coming through the nylon. Everything was dead quiet. No birds yet, no movement. I crawled out, expecting to see tracks or something disturbed around the campsite, but the ground was untouched, not a single mark that wasn't mine. The woods looked normal, calm, beautiful, ordinary. I walked a slow circle around the tent, scanning the ground carefully. The soil was soft, slightly damp from dew. If someone had been walking there all night, I should have seen prints, but there was nothing, not a thing. I cooked breakfast anyway because I was too tired to pack right away. The whole time I kept glancing at the tree line. Nothing moved, no sound. Around 9, I decided to leave. I packed up, loaded the truck, and before I got in, I took one last walk down to the stream. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before. Across the water, on the opposite bank, there was a small break in the trees, like a narrow game trail. And there, half hidden in the brush, I saw something metallic. A small circular object about the size of a dinner plate, lying flat on the ground. It was too smooth and perfectly round to be trash, and it caught the light oddly, almost dull but reflective at the same time. I crossed the stream, boots sinking into the mud, and got closer. It wasn't metal exactly. The surface felt warm. Not hot, just warmer than the air. There were no seams or markings on it. When I touched it again, it gave a faint vibration under my fingers, like a phone on silent just for half a second. Then nothing. That was enough for me. I backed away and went straight to the truck. The drive out felt longer than usual, and I kept glancing in the mirrors, expecting to see someone walking along the dirt road behind me. I didn't. When I got home, I checked my phone. The GPS track from my hiking app showed something strange. Between 9:47 and 10:10 p.m., there was a gap in the recording. Like the app had stopped tracking for a bit, then resumed in the same exact spot. I don't know if it was a signal issue or what, but it lined up exactly with the time I'd heard the footsteps the most. A few weeks later, I went back with my friend Mark. We hiked down to the same spot, and I showed him where I'd camped. The area looked exactly the same, except the round object by the stream was gone. No trace of it. We looked for a good hour and found nothing. He laughed it off, said I probably imagined half of it. But I know what I heard. I know the way those footsteps moved. Slow, steady, circling. Not animal sounds, not wind. Something walking, thinking, waiting. I haven't camped alone since. I still go sometimes, but always with someone else. Always with 2 flashlights and a fire big enough to light the trees. And even now, when the woods go quiet and the night gets heavy, I can still hear it in my head. That steady crunch of footsteps in the dark, circling, stopping, waiting for the light to go out. I woke up to the ceiling vibrating. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Half asleep, room hazy in the early morning light, but the low hum confirmed it. It wasn't loud, just enough to rattle the plaster lightly, like the whole room was vibrating softly. My bed seemed to move with it. I could feel it in my chest, faintly, like a pulse I couldn't ignore. My name's Graham. I live alone in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of an older building in Ashford. Nothing fancy. Creaky floors, thin walls, the kind of place where you hear neighbors breathing through the walls at night. But this wasn't normal. I lay there for a second, frozen, trying to convince myself it was just the building settling. But the hum was steady, low, and the vibration didn't feel random. It was uniform, almost deliberate. I tried to tell myself it was the radiator or a truck outside, but the street was quiet. My apartment was dead silent except for the hum. I reached over and grabbed my phone. Just wanted to check the time, needed some mundane anchor. When I touched the screen, it lit up, and at the exact moment my finger hit it, the vibration and hum stopped. Completely. Nothing, like a switch had been flipped. I stared at the ceiling for a few seconds, heart racing. 15 minutes ago, I'd gone to bed around 11:30, so it wasn't that late, but it was still early. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that maybe I'd been dreaming and my body felt the vibration. But it had been too real, too coordinated. I got out of bed and moved to the window. Fog was creeping along the street outside, everything damp and gray, early morning mist over the low streetlights. I couldn't see anything unusual, but I noticed the fog itself looked heavier, almost thicker than normal. Not like the weather report I'd seen. Just dense, as if it carried weight. Back in the kitchen, I made coffee, shaking slightly. I kept thinking about the ceiling. It didn't feel mechanical, not like a truck or an elevator passing. It was softer, somehow alive in a way that wasn't alive at all. I tried moving furniture in my mind. Maybe it was the fridge starting, but nothing explained the hum. After a while, I sat down with my cup, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore it. That's when I noticed the faint light patterns. Not shadows from the fog outside, nothing like that. Just tiny pulses of dim white across the ceiling, like reflections, but with no source I could see. They weren't steady, flickering in odd, uneven patterns, moving across the plaster slowly. I called my friend Eric, just to say something. He's a mechanic and likes weird stuff, so he's good for rationalizing odd things. Told him about the vibration and the hum. He said it sounded like a transformer or some electrical fault. I checked the breakers. Nothing tripped. Everything normal. Later, around 7, I tried going back to sleep in the living room. Couch pulled close to the window. The hum returned, softer, almost like it was testing me, vibrating under my back instead of above. The floor vibrated a little. I stayed still. I didn't move until my phone was within reach. I picked it up. The moment I touched it, everything stopped. Same as before. I started paying attention to little details. My laptop charged differently, lights in the kitchen flickered slightly when the hum started. Nothing consistent enough to explain what it was. Even the smoke detector beeped once, randomly, like it was reacting to something in the room. At some point, I noticed the hum seemed to come from every direction at once. Not the floor, not the ceiling. It felt like it surrounded me. I sat perfectly still, trying to figure out if it was sound or vibration or both. My cat, Jasper, who usually slept at my feet, wouldn't come near. He stayed crouched near the window, ears flat, eyes wide, staring into the mist outside. I checked my phone again. 7:13 a.m. It hadn't jumped, no lost time this round. But the sensation left me uneasy, like I'd been somewhere else while the hum happened, like a faint awareness of a presence, unspoken, watching. I didn't go back to bed. Instead, I showered and left the apartment early. Even outside, the fog seemed too thick, too still. No cars, no birds, not even the wind I usually hear in the morning. I drove to the diner, bought coffee, and tried to shake it off. The hum hadn't followed, at least not audibly, but the memory of the vibration lingered in my chest. I called Eric again while driving. He laughed nervously, told me maybe I needed sleep, or maybe a stray signal was affecting the building. I told him it wasn't just a sound, it was weight and presence. He didn't argue, just said to keep notes. Maybe I'd notice a pattern. The rest of the day was normal. Work was normal. People talked about sports and weather. But when I got home at night, I checked the ceiling first. Nothing. I slept with my phone in hand, ready to touch it if it happened again. It did. Around 2:30 a.m., the vibration started again, faint but unmistakable. Low hum, ceiling moving slightly. I stayed perfectly still, heart thumping. I reached for my phone. The moment I touched the screen, it stopped. I tried to explain it to myself rationally, building settling, electrical interference, dreams, stress, but I can't. It's the way it stops instantly when I touch my phone, like it reacts to me, like it's waiting. I've checked the building, neighbors, wires, even the fog outside. Nothing explains it. I've kept a log, noting times, duration, even the shape of the fog and light patterns. There are irregularities, yes, but no consistent mechanical cause. No pattern I can recognize other than the phone. Now, every night I leave it on the nightstand, thumb hovering near the screen. I don't know why it reacts to that, but I've learned the hard way that if I touch it too late, the hum returns stronger, longer. I've started sleeping in the living room, facing the window, trying to keep sightlines open. I haven't called anyone else. Part of me doesn't want to. People laugh at these things. And part of me worries that the moment I stop documenting, the hum will find a way to move beyond the ceiling. It's subtle, mostly. Not threatening, but persistent, and it waits. It always waits. Every time I wake to it, I wonder if I've lost some small fragment of time again, or if I've only imagined that. But I know the vibration, the hum, the way the air itself feels alive with something I can't name, it's real. And for now, that's enough to keep me from sleeping deeply. I was driving back from visiting my brother in Silver Creek, a town that's more gravel than asphalt, more trees than people. It was late, maybe 11:30, and the rain had just stopped, leaving the roads slick and shiny. I like driving at night when it's quiet. You can hear the tires hum and the water hiss and nothing else. No radios, no sirens, no honks, just the road and your headlights and whatever's out there waiting. My name's Eli. I work construction, so I don't usually get out of town at night, but my brother's moving apartments and he needed help. The drive back was lonely but normal, until it wasn't. About 10 miles past the last station, my headlights caught a flash off the side of the road. Not a reflection of wet asphalt or a street sign. This was more like something metallic, something that glinted sharply, then disappeared. I slowed, squinting through the windshield. Rainwater still clung to the glass in little streaks, distorting the light. I thought maybe it was a deer. They're everywhere this time of year. But deer don't reflect light like polished chrome. I eased the wheel over, careful, and then it vanished. Nothing. No movement, no shape, just wet black road on either side. I shook my head, thinking I'd imagined it. My eyes were tired, the long drive, all that stuff. I kept going. The road curved ahead, narrow and flanked by pines. Then I saw it again, farther down. Another flash, just catching the edge of my headlights. This time I stopped the car, foot on the brake, staring. There was nothing there, not even a shadow. I cursed under my breath. Maybe a signpost, maybe a puddle reflecting moonlight. I leaned forward and my dashboard clock caught my attention. It was 11:53. I remembered checking it 10 minutes ago, but I was sure of the time before the first flash, 11:38. 15 minutes gone. I checked my phone. No reception. Not that I expected to find anyone out here at this hour. The road stretched in front of me, dark and shiny, edges dissolving into black. I felt my pulse start to pick up. Then I saw the flash a third time. Closer now, just at the curve. My headlights hit it squarely. It looked like a panel of metal, low and wide, standing on the edge of the road. But when I blinked, it wasn't there. The road was empty, smooth, wet asphalt, not a leaf or branch out of place. I muttered to myself, telling myself to calm down. Maybe an animal, maybe my mind. But then the sound hit me. Not the usual night sounds, no frogs, no wind through the pines. The air was heavy, thick, and almost vibrating. My car felt loud inside. Every small creak, every tick of the dashboard like it was amplified. I stepped out, wet boots on slick pavement, peering into the darkness where the metal had been. Nothing. My flashlight, the cheap one I keep in the glove box, didn't show anything unusual. No puddle, no ditch, no reflective sign. The night was still. My heart slowed a little, but the tension stayed. I got back in the car, sat for a long moment, watching the black road stretch away. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been watched while I stepped out. The air felt heavier, almost like someone had pressed down on the space around me. I checked the clock again, 11:53. 15 minutes gone, just like that. I turned the key, engine hummed normally. I took off slowly, eyes darting down the road, headlights scanning the tree line. Nothing. The curves and dips of the road were ordinary. The reflection had vanished. The weight on the air lifted as I drove, but the memory of it stayed like a shadow in my chest. A few miles later, the road opened to a clearing, the kind of spot where a deer would appear if it wanted. I glanced over the shoulder in my mirror. Nothing. No metal, no flashes. But then I caught something faint in the distance, just a glint that disappeared before I could even focus. A trick of light, my mind telling stories. I told myself that again. By the time I hit the highway, the town lights faintly glowing ahead, I felt exhausted, my chest tight, hands still gripping the wheel too hard. I tried calling my brother, told him what happened. He laughed, chalked it up to exhaustion. But he didn't know about the clock. I didn't tell him. I didn't want to sound insane. I stopped at a diner for coffee, trying to make sense of it all. I remembered each flash clearly, each slick patch of asphalt, the feeling that something had been just beyond the beam of my headlights. The road was empty. Nothing followed me. Nothing overt. But the 15 minutes that weren't there, that vanished with no explanation, made my stomach twist. I drove home slowly after that, lights on low, ears straining for sound, eyes scanning every shadow at the edge of the road. Nothing appeared again. The road became ordinary. Streetlights, other cars, houses spaced apart. Life resumed its normal rhythms. At home, I parked in the driveway, checked my clock. 1:05. The math made sense if I ignored the missing 15 minutes. I went inside, left the lights off, looked out the window toward the woods behind my house. They were quiet. The wind rustled lightly through the trees. I still think about that night when I'm alone driving. The slick road, the flashes, the weight in the air, the metal, the missing time. I don't know what it was, and part of me doesn't want to. I tell myself it's a trick of light, a trick of the mind. But a trick doesn't leave the road so still, the air so heavy, or my dashboard clock 15 minutes ahead of reality. I haven't driven that stretch of road at night since. Not because I'm afraid, exactly, but because the memory sits in the passenger seat beside me every time I think about it, and I don't like sitting with it too long. I'll go back eventually. I might even take someone with me. But part of me worries that this road doesn't like company, that it likes to be alone, and that whatever flashes in the dark waits for that. For now, I just drive other roads, roads that curve into towns and lights and noise. But every time I see a reflective glint in the distance on a quiet stretch at night, my hands tighten on the wheel. And I know somewhere in that stretch of black asphalt, time might not be counting the way I think it is. I was working the overnight shift at the Oak Ridge Mall security office, one of those jobs where the hours are long and the action is usually non-existent. My name's Tyler Green, and I've done this for close to 5 years now. The building hums with fluorescent lights, the CCTV monitors casting a dull glow across the room. On that Thursday night, the weather outside was raw, heavy drizzle clinging to the asphalt, wind gusts rattling the lot signs. I was sipping lukewarm coffee, half watching the screens, half dozing. Around 1:42 a.m., my attention snapped to camera 7, the northeast corner of the parking lot. A dark green sedan had pulled up near one of the far entrances. Engine running, headlights on. Not unusual, but what caught my eye was the driver. He was sitting completely still, staring straight ahead, hands on the wheel. I zoomed in to check the plate. Then I glanced away to make a note, and when I looked back, nothing. The car was gone. I double-checked all nearby cameras. Nothing. The lot was empty. No streaks, no tire tracks forming in the rain, just empty asphalt. My first thought was a glitch. DVR skipping frames isn't unheard of, but the timecode kept running. I replayed the footage frame by frame. 2 minutes gone. Then at 1:44 a.m., the car reappeared in the exact same spot, engine still idling, headlights cutting through the mist. The driver hadn't moved an inch. I radioed my colleague Sandra, who was in the North Wing security room. "Sandra, you seeing this?" I said, voice a little tight. She leaned over her monitor. "See what? The car, northeast corner. Just vanished for 2 minutes." She frowned. "Are you messing with me?" "No. Look at the DVR. 2 minutes. Gone. Then it's back." She leaned closer to her screen. That's weird. Can you see him?" "Yep. Same guy, hands on the wheel, haven't moved a muscle." I made a note to call the police if he didn't leave soon, but I figured I should check in person first. I grabbed my raincoat and flashlight, heading for the northeast corner. The drizzle had eased, leaving the asphalt slick and reflective. When I arrived, the car was there, engine running, fog curling from the exhaust. The driver, a man in his 40s, brown hair damp from the rain, just sat, staring forward. "Sir," I said, flashlight illuminating the interiors, "I need you to step out for a minute. We're reviewing footage. It's unusual." He blinked at me. "Footage?" "Yes, you disappeared on camera for 2 minutes." He frowned. "I've been sitting here the whole time, engine running, heater on. I didn't move the car." I gestured toward the camera on the pole above us. "Because the feed, it shows you gone. 2 full minutes. No frames, nothing." He shook his head slowly. "Nope, didn't go anywhere. I swear. Been listening to the radio, same song repeating, that's all." I scanned the lot. Puddles reflected the overhead lights, empty parking spaces stretching into the mist. Nothing moved. The rain had stopped. The lot eerily quiet except for the hum of the engine and the soft drip from the eaves above the storefronts. I felt a chill. Back in the security office, I reviewed the DVR footage again. I watched him appear at 1:42, vanish for 2 minutes, then reappear at 1:44, unchanged. I checked timestamps, system logs, even the DVR's integrity files. No skipped frames, no errors. Everything was normal. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd misread the initial feed. Maybe the car had rolled out a frame and the cameras missed it, but no, it wasn't a blind spot. Every angle covered that corner, and I watched it closely, frame by frame. Nothing. The car had literally disappeared. Sandra was staring at her monitor, wide-eyed. "That's impossible. You saw it too?" "Every second." I rubbed my eyes. "It's like it just wasn't there for 2 minutes, then poof, back." The man eventually drove off around 2 a.m., same direction he'd been facing, nothing unusual. But I couldn't shake the feeling something had changed in that 2-minute gap. The lot looked the same, the asphalt wet, the air cold, but something about the corner felt off, like the space itself had shifted. I tried to carry on with my shift, but I kept checking that camera, half expecting it to happen again. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder, almost oppressive. Every car that came and went felt like it might vanish next. Later, I asked the mall manager about security anomalies. "Parking lot glitches," he said, shrugging. "Cameras aren't perfect. People get confused. Happens all the time." I wanted to believe him, but the footage stayed with me. 2 minutes. Nothing. Then the car exactly the same as before. The driver swore he hadn't stopped the engine, and the DVR confirmed it. I've watched that footage more times than I care to admit. Every detail, the puddles, the reflections, the fog, the lights, everything normal. Except him. And the 2 minutes. Whatever happened in that corner that night didn't follow the rules I know. Now, when I patrol the northeast corner alone, I check it first. Every time. The memory of the car vanishing lingers, like something in that space doesn't obey the same logic as the rest of the world. And honestly, I hope I never see it happen again. But I keep wondering, 2 minutes, gone, and nothing explains it. We were camping near Crater Lake in early August, just a small group of us from college who hadn't hung out together in years. There was me, Alex, my girlfriend Taylor, and 2 friends, Jordan and Max. We'd picked a quiet spot off one of the Forest Service roads, maybe a half hour from the main park area, just far enough that it felt like our own corner of the woods. It was one of those warm, perfectly still nights. No wind, no bugs, just the smell of pine and smoke from our little fire. We'd been sitting around for hours, half talking, half staring at the flames, drinking light beers and making fun of Max for bringing a full-sized pillow. Around midnight, I remember Taylor saying it was weird how quiet it was. She wasn't wrong. Even the crickets had gone silent. At first, we joked about it. Jordan said maybe a bear was watching us. Taylor rolled her eyes. But the silence stuck around. It wasn't just that the bugs stopped. It was like the whole forest stopped moving. The air felt heavier. I pulled out my phone to check the time and noticed I didn't have any signal, not even one bar. I said something about it and Max checked his too. Nothing. Taylor tried hers. Same thing. Jordan's was dead already. It wasn't that weird at first. We were deep enough that losing service wasn't unheard of. But it was strange how it happened to all of us at once. We'd had decent reception earlier that night. Even FaceTimed another friend from the site. It just cut out completely in the span of maybe a minute. We sat there for a while just kind of joking about it, until Max looked up suddenly and asked if we saw that. At first I didn't know what he meant, but then I saw it too. A soft light way off in the valley, like a car's headlights shining through fog. Only there wasn't any fog and it wasn't moving along a road. It was too far down and too steady. The light started getting brighter, not fast but steady, until it was lighting up the trees on the opposite ridge like a flash of daylight. The whole forest below us glowed this pale white for maybe 5 seconds, maybe less. Then it all went dark again. No sound, no explosion, no smoke, just light, then gone. For a few seconds, none of us said anything. I remember the fire crackling again like it had gone quiet too. Jordan whispered something like, "Was that a flare?" But it didn't move like a flare. It had come straight down, smooth and slow, and stopped just above the tree line before fading out. I grabbed my phone and tried to record just in case it came back, but the camera wouldn't open. The screen froze and then crashed to the home screen. Taylor said hers did the same thing. We stayed up for another hour watching that part of the valley. Every now and then, one of us thought we saw something. A flicker between the trees, a quick pulse of light, but it was so faint we couldn't be sure. When we finally decided to call it a night, the woods still felt wrong. The silence hadn't gone away. Even the wind was gone. I zipped the tent up tight, but I couldn't sleep. Every few minutes, I thought I heard something faint and electrical. Not quite buzzing, more like a distant transformer hum, but it never seemed to come from one direction. Around 3 a.m., Taylor whispered that she had to pee and asked if I'd walk with her. We stepped out with our flashlights, and I immediately noticed how dark everything was. Not just moonless, pitch black. Our lights felt weaker than usual, like they only cut through a few feet of air before dying out. We walked maybe 20 yards toward the tree line, and that's when Taylor froze. She whispered, "Do you hear that?" At first I didn't, then I caught it. That same humming sound, only louder now. It had this slow rhythm to it, like it was pulsing. We stood there listening for maybe 10 seconds, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It seemed to move, first behind us, then off to the right, like something big but invisible was passing through the trees. I told her we should go back, and we did, quickly. When we got inside the tent, we heard one last low vibration, deep enough to feel in our stomachs. Then silence again. When morning came, everything looked normal. The sun was up, birds were loud, signal was back. It honestly made me wonder if we'd just been overtired and imagined half of it. But when I checked my phone battery, it was almost dead, even though I hadn't used it much. Taylor's was too. Over breakfast, Max said he'd woken up in the middle of the night and thought he saw the light again through the tent fabric, but he wasn't sure if he dreamed it. He said it was faint, moving slowly across the trees like a flashlight beam from far away. We decided to hike down toward the valley that afternoon. It was steep, but not too bad. The woods down there felt different, damp, colder, even though it was still hot out. We found a small clearing with burned-looking grass, maybe 20 feet across, right where we figured the light had stopped. The ground smelled like metal. There were no tracks, no debris, just that smell and a weird circular patch where the dirt was darker. Jordan joked that it was just campers with fireworks, but nobody laughed. We didn't stay down there long. When we got back to camp, we packed up early and drove home that evening. I didn't think much about it until a few days later when I was going through my phone. I'd completely forgotten I'd tried to record that night. The video was only 3 seconds long, and it was just black. No light, no sound, except for this low, pulsing hum in the background. Not constant, just rhythmic. It sounded exactly like what we heard in the woods later that night. I showed it to Taylor, and she said she never heard that sound while we were recording. None of us did. But it's there, clear as day. I sent the clip to Max and Jordan, and they both swore it wasn't edited. Max said he'd play it on his speaker, and his dog started barking at it immediately. I don't know what to make of it. It's still on my phone, that short black clip with the humming that none of us heard. Sometimes I play it with headphones just to see if I missed something in the background. The weird part is that if you turn the volume up all the way, at the very end of the clip, right before it cuts off, you can hear something faint. Not a voice exactly, more like a sharp inhale, close to the mic. I've shown it to a few people, and most of them say it's probably interference. I've tried recording in the same spot, and nothing like that ever shows up. We haven't gone camping together since. I was flying a night cargo route from Spokane to Billings, one of those quiet, uneventful runs where you mostly just watch the instruments and try not to think about how alone you are up there. It was around 2:30 in the morning, clear sky, no turbulence, just a light haze off to the west. I'd made this trip dozens of times, usually half asleep by the midpoint, sipping cold coffee and watching the moon creep across the windshield. That night, I was about 90 miles east of Missoula, cruising at 28,000 feet. Everything was routine. I remember checking the altimeter, then glancing outside, the way you do when you get bored and just want to remind yourself there's still a world out there beyond the cockpit glass. That's when I saw a small flash above the cloud layer, like sunlight reflecting off metal, except there wasn't any sunlight. The moon was behind me, low on the horizon. At first, I figured it was another plane, maybe a commercial flight on a westbound path a few thousand feet higher. But when I radioed into ATC to ask if they had any traffic near my altitude, the controller came back with negative. Only you in that airspace. I didn't think much of it. Sky's big, radar coverage has gaps in that region. Could have been anything, but about 30 seconds later, I caught it again. Same flash, same spot, dead ahead and slightly above my altitude. This time, it wasn't just a flicker. It held steady, a pale silver gleam just beyond the front windshield. I leaned forward, trying to keep it in sight while juggling the yoke with one hand. The weird part was how steady it was. No navigation lights, no strobes, no movement. Just this pinpoint reflection that somehow stayed perfectly centered no matter how I adjusted my heading. I tried to measure distance using the horizon, but it's tricky at night. Could have been a mile away or 50. It didn't move relative to me, and that was the thing that started to feel off. Usually, even stationary lights, like stars, shift slightly as you bank or correct course. This one didn't. It hung there like it was glued to the windshield. I told ATC again that I might have unidentified traffic ahead, asked them to recheck radar. There was a pause, then the controller said, "Still nothing on scope. Can you estimate bearing?" I gave them my coordinates and bearing, and they told me to maintain heading. I looked down at my gauges, airspeed just under 280 knots, altitude holding. Everything fine. But when I looked back up, that reflection had grown brighter. It wasn't glaring, just sharper, like it had adjusted somehow. Then it moved. Not toward me, not sideways, just slightly upward like a slow elevator going up through invisible floors. I felt my stomach drop a bit because the motion didn't look natural. It wasn't a curve or a climb. It was too perfect, a clean vertical line. I followed it visually until it faded into the black above the clouds. Gone. I sat there for a few seconds, waiting for it to reappear, but the sky was empty. I almost convinced myself it was just some atmospheric trick, light hitting ice crystals or something. But before I could finish the thought, the reflection came back. It appeared lower this time, near my right wingtip. I flinched, instinctively pulling slightly left, but it held its position like it was tethered to me. I craned my neck and saw it was actually above the wing, not close enough to trigger any alarms, but near enough that I could make out shape, or lack of one. It wasn't round or oblong. It didn't have edges. It was just a reflection, pure and sharp, hovering in midair where nothing should reflect. November 7-4 Delta, are you showing any weather anomalies ahead? I asked ATC, trying to sound casual. Negative, conditions are clear. You still have visual? Affirmative. Objects maintaining altitude with me. Silence on the line for a few seconds. Then, copy. No radar contact. Continue as filed. That's all they said. Just keep going. The reflection followed for about 10 minutes. I checked the clock because I wanted to know if I was overreacting. 10 minutes exactly. It never drifted, never changed brightness, just stayed there, matching my speed and heading like it was locked on. I thought about grabbing my phone for a photo, but cargo planes aren't exactly roomy. Everything's strapped down and the phone was buried in my flight bag behind the seat. Besides, my hands were shaking a little. I didn't want to take my eyes off it. At one point, I banked 5 degrees north just to see what it'd do. The reflection adjusted instantly, same relative position. That was the part that unnerved me most. It wasn't random. It was reacting. Then, without warning, it rose. No acceleration curve, no noise, nothing. Just a smooth vertical movement that went from level with my cockpit to a speck disappearing straight upward in maybe 2 seconds. No sonic boom, no contrail, just gone. I waited for it to come back, but the sky stayed empty. After a few minutes, I called ATC again. November 7-4 Delta, the object's no longer in visual range. You sure you're not picking anything up? They confirmed again. No radar hits, no nearby traffic. The rest of the flight was dead quiet. I landed in Billings around 4:15, taxied to the cargo ramp, and started doing the usual post-flight checks. Everything looked normal except for one thing. The skin temperature reading on the right wing panel was about 10 degrees higher than the left. Not crazy, but noticeable. I wrote it up in the maintenance log. Didn't mention the reflection. The mechanic on duty, this older guy named Russ, came over while I was unloading and asked if I'd flown through any lightning. I said no, clear the whole way. He shrugged, said maybe I'd hit a patch of warm air. Later in the break room, I asked if the other pilots ever saw weird lights out there. A few of them laughed and told stories about static discharges and satellites, the usual stuff. But one guy, Eddie, who flew a similar route 2 nights a week, didn't laugh. He just said, "Yeah, east of Missoula, right?" I asked what he meant, and he said he'd seen something shiny in the same corridor last winter. Didn't follow him, though. Just appeared for a bit and vanished. I didn't sleep much that day. I kept replaying how smooth that upward movement was. You can't mistake motion like that. It was deliberate, not some drifting light or reflection. It didn't accelerate, it just moved. Straight up. A couple weeks later, I checked the flight data logs for that night out of curiosity. All normal readings. No deviations in speed or altitude. I asked if maintenance had found anything on the right wing panel, but they just said, heat differential resolved, like it was no big deal. I stopped flying that route for a while after that, switched to shorter regional hops. I told myself it was for the better schedule, but that wasn't really it. Sometimes on clear nights, I'll look up from the ground when I see a plane crossing over. Every now and then, I'll catch a glint above it, something shining for a second before it disappears. Could be another aircraft, could be nothing. But I always wait to see if it moves, if it follows. So far, nothing's ever matched speed with me again. The first night I saw it was a Tuesday. I live in a small house on the edge of Franklin, Maine, right where the town sort of fades into woods and marsh. There's maybe one street light at the corner, and after that, it's just trees and darkness. My place backs up to a long stretch of forest that eventually runs all the way to Branch Lake. It's quiet, which I like. That night around 11, I was sitting in the living room with the TV on low, had lights off except for the lamp by the couch. I got up to take the trash out, and as I stepped onto the porch, I noticed something bright through the trees. At first, I thought it was the moon. It had that pale glow, kind of soft, but when I looked closer, I realized it was too low. Way too low. The tree line out back is maybe 40 feet tall, and this thing was hovering just above it, perfectly still. I stood there for a minute, waiting for it to move. It didn't. No flicker, no drift, just a solid white light. I watched long enough to start feeling dumb, like maybe it was a tower light or something, but there aren't any towers out there. I've hiked that way plenty of times. It's just forest and swamp. After a few minutes, I went back inside, kind of unsettled but not scared. I looked out again before bed around 1:30, and it was still there. Same spot, same brightness. When I got up the next morning, it was gone. I didn't think about it much until the next night. Same time, around 11:30, I went to lock up before bed and saw it again. That same bright light, perfectly still above the tree line. I tried to convince myself it was maybe a plane lined up for approach to Bangor Airport, even though that's about 25 miles away and in the opposite direction. I watched for blinking or movement, but there wasn't any. I even went inside and grabbed my binoculars. Cheap ones I keep for bird watching. When I looked through them, the light didn't look like a point anymore. It was slightly oval-shaped, kind of like the end of a flashlight beam if you pointed at a wall. It was pure white, not yellow or orange like a star, and it didn't waver at all. I watched until my arms got tired. When I looked at the clock after I went back in, it was 12:46. I could have sworn I'd only been out there 20 minutes. By the third night, I started feeling uneasy. Same light, same spot, same stillness. It wasn't something far away, like a plane or satellite. It had that strange, near feeling, like when a flashlight beam cuts through fog right in front of you. That night, I called my neighbor, Beth. She lives across the street and a little downhill. I asked if she could see it from her place. She sounded tired, but humored me. "Hold on," she said. I waited, phone to my ear, listening to her open her door. A few seconds passed, then she said, "No, I don't see anything." That didn't make sense. If it was above the tree line behind my house, she should have had a clearer view of it. I told her never mind, that maybe I was just seeing something on my side. She said good night, and that was that. After that, it became routine. Every night around the same time, I'd look out and there it would be. I stopped watching for long. Just a quick glance, a confirmation it was still there. I tried not to make a big deal of it, but it bothered me more each time. The fifth night, something changed. I'd gone to bed early, but I woke up around 2:30 needing a drink of water. As I passed the back window, I glanced out automatically. Habit by then. The light was still there, but it looked slightly dimmer. I stared at it, half asleep, trying to figure out if that was real or just my eyes adjusting. Then I realized it wasn't dimming, it was pulsing. Slowly, rhythmically, not blinking. Just a soft fade in and out, like breathing. I stood there for maybe a full minute before the hair on my arm stood up. It wasn't because it was bright or threatening. There was something about the regularity of that pulse that felt wrong, like it was responding to something unseen. I stepped back from the window. Right then, the refrigerator made a loud click, the kind it does when it kicks on, but it made me jump hard enough that I dropped the glass I was holding. It shattered on the floor, and when I looked back out the window, the light was gone. The next day, I told myself not to look for it that night. Just go to bed. Ignore it. Pretend I never saw it in the first place. But around midnight, I cracked the blinds anyway. It was back, steady again, not pulsing this time. I watched from behind the blinds for a while, and I could have sworn it was lower than before. Not by much, maybe a few feet, but enough to notice against the tree line. Around one, I saw something else. The woods underneath it, they flickered, like a shadow passed across them, even though there was no wind and no other lights. Just a brief dark ripple. I thought maybe an animal crossed through, but the movement didn't match that. It was more like the whole patch of trees dimmed for half a second. That was enough for me. I closed the blinds and sat on the couch with all the lights on until morning. The seventh night, I didn't plan to look, but curiosity gets in your head like that. It's worse when you try to ignore it. At about 11:15, I was sitting at the table eating cereal, pretending not to care. My phone buzzed with a message from my friend Tyler. He'd sent a link to a group chat from work. Someone had posted about strange lights over Franklin. The post said, "Did anyone else see that bright light over the woods the last few nights?" There were a few comments. One person said they saw something near the water tower but thought it was a drone. Another said it wasn't moving, so probably a star. That freaked me out more than it should have. It meant whatever it wasn't just visible from my place. Other people were seeing it too. I decided to take a video this time. I set my phone up on the porch railing and recorded for about 3 minutes. The light didn't move. When I looked back at the video inside, I noticed something strange. The light wasn't centered where it had been in real life. It was slightly to the right, like the camera picked up a different position than what my eyes saw. Also, the sound, under the normal night noises, there was this faint, steady humming, barely audible, but definitely there. I replayed it 3 times, and that hum stayed constant through all of it. I hadn't heard it while standing outside. At some point that night, I must have fallen asleep on the couch. When I woke up, the sun was just coming up. I checked the window. The light was gone, as always. It hasn't come back since. But for the next few nights, I noticed little things. My porch light flickered randomly. The clock on the microwave reset twice, like the power went out for a second, but the rest of the house was fine. One night, the radio in the kitchen turned on by itself. Just static, full volume, no station. I deleted the video after that, not because I was scared of what was on it, but because I started hearing that same low hum when the house got quiet, even without it playing. It's been 2 weeks now. No more light, no more flickering, no more hum. But sometimes, late at night when the wind dies down, I stand at the kitchen window and look toward the tree line. And I swear, even though I can't see anything, I can feel that same stillness, that thick, heavy quiet. Like something's still out there, just waiting for the right time to turn the light back on. It was a warm Saturday evening in late July, and I was standing by the grill in my backyard, flipping burgers while a few friends lounged on the deck chairs with beers in hand. My name's Jared, by the way. I live in a quiet subdivision on the outskirts of Springfield. Nothing fancy, mostly single-family homes with small yards. The sun had just set, leaving that hazy purple light across the neighborhood, and I had the string lights on the deck flickering softly above us. We were joking about work, talking about some local news story, when the first odd thing happened. The lights overhead dimmed for a second, then came back. A small flicker, nothing major, but everyone noticed it. "Did the power just dip?" said my friend Leo, squinting up at the deck lights. "Probably just a surge," I said. These old lines can be weird. I went back to the burgers, but then my phone buzzed in my pocket. When I checked it, the screen had reset. The time said 12. I laughed, thinking maybe the battery had died weirdly. Guys," I said. "My phone just reset. Weird, right?" Then another friend, Mia, held up her tablet. Same thing, 12 flashing on the screen. We started checking our other devices. Every single one had reset to 12. The mini Bluetooth speaker, the grill timer, even the small digital clock on the counter. "Okay, that's not normal," Leo said, his tone a little nervous now. He wasn't the type to freak out over electronics. I was about to suggest it was a neighborhood power blip again when our neighbor, Mr. Carter from 3 houses down, poked his head over the fence. He always comes out when there's a light show or some noise. "Look up," he said, his voice low like he didn't want to startle anyone. I followed his finger. My eyes landed on the sky above. That's when the backyard barbecue completely stopped being about burgers and beers. There was a shape moving across the stars. Massive. Not like a plane or a drone. It didn't blink or leave any lights. No sound. Just a long, dark outline drifting slowly from west to east. It blocked the stars behind it in a way that was hard to describe. Like a cloud, but more precise, more solid, and impossibly big. Everyone went quiet. Even the kids running around the yard froze. My stomach sank in a way I hadn't felt before. What is that?" Mia whispered. I don't know," I said. I'd seen plenty of weird stuff in my life, but this didn't fit into any category. It didn't even seem like something that belonged in the atmosphere. The air was still, no breeze, no engine hum, nothing. The shadow moved steadily, as if it had a purpose. We tried to track it, and every time we shifted position on the deck, it stayed parallel with our line of sight. It didn't waver. I grabbed my phone, thinking at least I could get some video. By now, the devices had started acting weird again. The screen kept flickering. Every time I held it up, the shadow seemed sharper, closer. I tried recording, but the phone's camera wouldn't focus. The screen just showed a dark blur, as if the light itself refused to enter the lens. Mia had her binoculars. She handed them to me. Looking through them didn't clarify anything. Not really. Just a black, smooth shape drifting above us. No structure, no edges I could make out. It didn't look metallic or natural. Just there. After a few minutes, which felt like hours, the lights in our neighborhood flickered again, just for a second. Then everything returned to normal. The string lights on the deck were back at full brightness. Our devices jumped forward a few minutes, 12:04 now, 12:05, but nothing else seemed wrong. The shadow was gone, no sound, no trace. Just the stars, twinkling normally, the same sky we'd seen every night. We stood there for a long time, staring. Everyone was quiet, hesitant to say anything. Leo finally muttered, "Well, I guess the burgers are done?" I laughed, but it was hollow. Nobody touched the food. We didn't talk much for the rest of the evening. Everyone kept sneaking glances at the sky, half expecting the shape to come back. I tried later to look for it from inside the house, from my bedroom window. Nothing. The sky was normal, quiet, peaceful. Over the next week, I kept thinking about it. At work, on the way to the grocery store, driving past the same neighborhood at night, I kept scanning the sky, half hoping to see something, half hoping not to. Mr. Carter mentioned it too the next time I saw him. He didn't elaborate much, just said, "You saw it too, huh?" and walked off. I told a few close friends, but nobody had an explanation. No planes were reported, no satellites passed over at that time, nothing. A few days later, the media picked up a local report of power anomalies in our area. Nothing serious, just short flickers, but no mention of anything in the sky. Sometimes at night, when I'm sitting on the deck and it's quiet, I'll look up at the stars. The shadow didn't leave a trace, but I feel like it's still out there somewhere, moving slowly, silently above the rooftops and trees. I can't explain why it was there or what it was, but I know what I saw. It wasn't a cloud. It wasn't an airplane, and it didn't belong to this world. I still check my devices before I go outside. Every so often, the clock will glitch for a second, and I swear I hear that faint hum again. Just barely, like a memory of the shadow drifting overhead. I can't explain any of it, but I also know I'll never look at a quiet night sky the same way again. It was around 11 on a weeknight, late enough that the air had that heavy, still feeling to it. The kind where you can hear every small sound, crickets, the hum of a transformer, the wind sliding through the trees. I'd taken my dog Penny out for one last walk before bed. She's a golden retriever, gentle but skittish, especially when it's dark. I always walked her down the gravel lane that runs behind my house, past a few other yards, then out toward the open field behind the old Granger property. The field isn't anything special, just a wide stretch of grass and wildflowers, maybe 30 acres, bordered by a thin line of oaks. There's a small irrigation ditch cutting through it, and beyond that, more farmland. No houses close by, no streetlights, just open country. We'd been walking maybe 10 minutes when I noticed it, a pale glow off to the right, just above the grass. I thought it was a yard light at first, but there aren't any houses in that direction. It wasn't a steady light, either. It pulsed. Not bright enough to hurt your eyes, but enough that it stood out against the darkness. Penny stopped when she saw it. Her tail went stiff, not wagging, just frozen midair. I gave the leash a little tug, but she didn't move. Her ears were perked, eyes locked on that glow. I remember checking my phone to see if maybe a car had turned onto the road behind us. Nothing. The light wasn't moving, just sitting low in the field, maybe 100 yards out. At first, I figured it was someone with a flashlight, or maybe one of those headlamps people wear while working on fences or equipment. The Granger's son sometimes hunted coyotes out there. But there wasn't any sound, no talking, no rustling, no engine. Penny started whining, low and quiet, like she wanted to bark but wasn't sure she should. I told her, "It's okay, girl," mostly just to calm myself down. The weird part wasn't the light itself, it was how still everything got. Usually, that field buzzes with insects at night, but as soon as we got close enough to really see the glow, the sound cut out. Not just quiet, gone. No crickets, no wind. Even the distant hum from the highway faded. We stood there for maybe a full minute, just listening to nothing. I could still feel the breeze on my face, but I couldn't hear it moving through the grass. I decided to walk closer, slow, just to see what it was. I didn't want to freak out over a broken floodlight or some weird reflection. Penny didn't want to move at first, but she followed once I started tugging her along. The closer we got, the stranger it looked. The glow wasn't coming from a single point. It was spread out like mist, but only in one circular patch of air, maybe 10 feet across. The grass underneath it looked washed out, almost colorless. Every few seconds, the brightness would fade, then come back stronger, like it was breathing. When I stepped off the gravel onto the dirt edge of the field, I noticed something else. My footsteps sounded wrong. The crunch of the gravel, the thud of the dirt, muffled like I was walking on thick carpet. Even Penny's tags didn't jingle anymore. She looked back at me with her ears pinned flat, tail tucked. "Come on," I said, though my voice came out soft and dull like the air itself was absorbing it. I only took a few more steps before stopping. The glow was about 50 feet away now, floating just above the grass. It wasn't hot or flickering like fire. It was cold light, white with a faint blue tint. I bent down to touch Penny, and that's when I realized I couldn't hear her breathing either. I could feel it, the rhythm of her chest rising and falling, but there was no sound. Something about that detail messed with me more than anything else. I turned around, planning to just go home and forget about it, but when I glanced back, I swear the glow had shifted closer, maybe 10 feet. It wasn't fast or dramatic, it just seemed nearer. I blinked a few times, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, it was closer. I took a few steps backward and it didn't follow exactly. It just seemed to swell like the brightness grew when I moved. At that point, Penny started pulling on the leash, whining again, except I couldn't hear it. Her mouth moved, but there was nothing. The silence was so total that it made my ears ache, like they were waiting for a sound that wouldn't come. I remember trying to call out, maybe to see if anyone was out there, but my own voice barely registered in my head. I could feel the sound in my throat, but nothing carried. It was like yelling underwater. I turned again and started walking quickly back toward the gravel path. My footsteps were still muffled, and every few seconds I'd glance over my shoulder. The glow stayed in the field, pulsing slow and even, but I couldn't shake the feeling it was watching. Not in a person kind of way, more like the way you feel when motion sensors track you at a store. When I reached the edge of the gravel, I suddenly heard a sound again, a faint crunch under my boot. It startled me, made me jump. Then, just like that, everything came back. The hum of the power lines, a dog barking somewhere, the whisper of wind through dry grass. Penny let out this shaky little bark, like she'd been holding it in the whole time. I turned to look one last time. The glow was still there, smaller now, maybe dimmer. I stood watching it pulse a few more times before it just faded. Not like it switched off, more like fog burning away in sunlight. 1 second it was there, then it wasn't. The field looked normal again, completely still. I hurried home after that, almost jogging the last stretch. Penny didn't need encouragement. She kept close to my leg the whole way. When I got back, I sat on the porch steps, leash still in my hand. My ears felt weirdly sensitive, like I'd come out of a loud concert. Every noise, the crickets, the wind chime, sounded too sharp. I checked my phone just out of habit. The time read 12:03. We'd only been out about half an hour, same as usual. I tried to tell myself it was some kind of atmospheric thing, maybe distant headlights reflecting on mist, but that doesn't explain the silence, or the way sound came back like someone flipped a switch. Later that night, after I'd calmed down a bit, I looked out my bedroom window toward the field. I couldn't see much in the dark, but I noticed that even the farm lights on the far side looked dimmer than usual, like there was a haze sitting low over the grass. The next morning, I walked Penny along the same route. It was bright and sunny, and I half expected to find burned grass or tire tracks or something. But there was nothing. The field looked normal, just wet from dew. Except there was a circular patch about 10 feet wide where the grass was pressed down. Not dead, not burned, just flattened like something heavy had hovered over it for a while and pushed the blades all one way. I knelt to touch the ground. It was cool, not scorched or anything, but there was this faint metallic smell, like static before a thunderstorm. Penny didn't go near it. She sniffed once from a few feet away, then turned and pulled on the leash like she wanted to leave. I didn't tell anyone about it. Not my neighbors, not the Grangers. I figured they'd say I imagined it or that it was swamp gas or whatever explanation people give when they don't know what else to say. That night, I walked Penny again. Same route. Nothing strange happened. No glow, no silence. Everything was normal. But for the next week, every time I passed that stretch of field, Penny would slow down and stare at that same spot. Sometimes she'd whine softly, looking out into the darkness, and every time, just for a second, I'd think I saw the faintest shimmer over the grass, like heat waves, except the air was cold. It never glowed again, but I stopped walking that way after a while. The silence that night wasn't something I could explain, and I didn't want to feel it again. I'd been out on the water before, plenty of times, but nothing like that morning. My name's Tom Reynolds. I fish out of Port Haven, Maine, and I usually keep the boat out for early runs when the water's calm and the fog hangs low. That day was just like any other at first. The sky was gray and heavy, low clouds pushing down over the harbor. The air smelled like salt and rain. I left the dock around 4:30 a.m., my little skiff rocking gently in the rising tide. I wasn't expecting much. It was supposed to be a quiet morning, good for mackerel. I had my gear sorted, thermos of coffee, a radio that mostly picked up static, and the occasional weather report. I steered out past the channel markers, the fog thickening around me so I could barely see the shoreline. The sound of water slapping the hull and the engine's hum was comforting. Normal. Then I saw it. At first I thought it was a trick of the fog, like the way the morning light filtered through the clouds. But it wasn't light from the sun. Not really. There was a column of brightness reaching from the cloud cover straight down into the water, like a spotlight aimed by someone far above. It was pure white, soft at the edges, but impossibly vivid, almost glowing. The water where it touched shimmered unnaturally, like it was made of glass. I stopped the engine and just stared. The compass on the dashboard wobbled slightly, but I didn't think much of it at first. The fog made the boat sway and the water wasn't completely still. I took a sip of coffee, trying to rationalize it. Maybe some crane or lighthouse I hadn't noticed. But the column was too isolated, too precise. I nudged the throttle forward. I had to get closer. I wanted to see if it was some kind of weather phenomenon, a sunbeam through a break in the clouds. But as I steered toward the light, my compass started spinning. Full circles, wild and fast. I could feel the needle swing one way, then snap back, then swing the other. I gripped the wheel tighter, my stomach twisting. The radio buzzed in sudden static bursts, high-pitched and low, like it was fighting some interference. I slowed down, keeping the boat's nose pointed toward the column, trying not to think about how absurd this all looked. The spinning stopped as suddenly as it started, the needle snapping back to its usual north. I glanced around the horizon. The fog hadn't changed. The sky was the same dull gray, but the column still stretched from cloud to water, completely vertical. I raised my binoculars. Nothing unusual in the clouds themselves. No structure, no aircraft. The water under the light shimmered, but there was no ripple beyond what my hull made. The brightness didn't hurt my eyes, but it made the surrounding gray seem darker, like it was absorbing everything else. I reached for the radio to call the harbor, maybe see if anyone else was out. Anyone seeing this. Just as I did, there was a soft hum under the engine's noise. Low, steady, almost rhythmic, vibrating through the floorboards. I stopped talking into the microphone, tried to locate it. Nothing. The sound didn't seem directional, just there. I leaned over the bow, trying to see if maybe it was some reflection or strange wave pattern. And that's when I noticed something else. The water inside the column wasn't moving like normal water. It was still, almost like glass, perfectly calm despite the wind and the boat rocking outside it. My reflection looked sharp, almost wrong, and then it shifted. like it warped just enough that I couldn't be sure it was me. The hum got slightly louder, or maybe it was closer. I could feel it in my chest, like the sound itself was pressing on my ribs. My heart started to race. I wanted to turn back, but my curiosity pinned me there. I reached for the compass again. It spun briefly, then stopped. North was where it was supposed to be. I edged the boat closer. The light didn't change, didn't react, but the fog around the column seemed thinner, clearer. I could see water under it, and I thought I saw something move, just a shadow shifting beneath the brightness, subtle, almost imperceptible, but deliberate. I swallowed hard, my hand trembling slightly on the throttle. I was alone out here, surrounded by fog and water, and whatever this was, it wasn't part of the natural world I knew. I wanted to call someone, wanted to radio someone I trusted, but the hum and static made that impossible. Then it happened. The column flickered, just for a second. The water shimmered violently like heat waves off pavement. The shadow moved again, faster this time, then the light dimmed in the center as if it was drawing inward. My stomach flipped. I cut the engine, gripping the wheel, my knuckles white. And just like that, it was gone. The light collapsed upward, like someone had pulled a cord. The column vanished into the clouds, leaving only a dull gray sky and foggy water. The hum stopped. The compass was steady, the radio was silent but normal. I blinked, unsure if I'd imagined it. I eased the boat back toward the harbor, hands shaking. Every instinct told me to leave, to forget it, to not tell anyone. But I knew what I saw. I wasn't imagining it. My whole body felt off, like my senses hadn't quite caught up with reality. When I reached the dock, I tied up the boat and sat there for a long time. The fog started to lift, sunlight breaking through the clouds. Everything was normal again. Birds were chirping, boats moving, the world acting like nothing had happened. I checked my compass on the dock. It worked perfectly. My radio? Normal. My binoculars? Nothing out of place. I even tested my gear in the morning light. Everything was fine. People laughed when I told them later. Fishermen like to joke about strange things at sea. But I know what I saw. I don't know if it was some atmospheric anomaly, a reflection, or something else entirely. I keep thinking about that column of light, how the water under it didn't behave like water, how the shadow moved, subtly, deliberately. I haven't been back out to that spot since, but sometimes, early in the morning, before the fog clears, I swear I see a faint shimmer on the horizon and I feel the hum again in my chest. It's enough to make me grip the wheel a little tighter and wonder if that column will ever return. I can't explain it, I can't prove it, but I know what I saw. And every time I think about it, I can't shake the feeling that the sea isn't as empty as I thought. I pulled off the highway because the sky looked wrong. I'd been driving the long way home, up the old county road that climbs out of the valley and hugs the ridge for a few miles. It was late October, cold enough that the windows fogged for a minute when I shut the heater off. I wasn't headed anywhere in particular, just wanted to be somewhere with a view and no one to talk to. The kind of place that makes your problems look smaller from a distance. There was a turnout with room for 2 cars, one of those scuffed pullouts with a cracked sign warning of deer. I killed the engine, sat for a second in the dark while my eyes adjusted, and then stepped out. The air up there had that thin, clean quality mountain air gets, sharper than the valley, with a faint smell of damp pine. The stars were bright and low. A thin band of cloud hung over the eastern horizon where the valley dropped away. That's when I saw the lights. They weren't aircraft lights. I thought at first maybe a radio tower or some new wind farm with warning beacons, but they were too small and too soft. 3 lights hovered over the valley in kind of a loose triangle, maybe half a mile apart. They sat at roughly the same altitude, low enough that I could make out a slight shimmer in the air beneath them where they touched the horizon. One was a dull white, the others were a pale amber and a cool blue. They pulsed slowly, not flashing so much as breathing. I fumbled for my phone to take a picture. The reflex to document felt stupid and necessary, but the screen stayed dark when I tapped it. The battery icon showed a sliver of life and then blinked away. I shook it and tapped again, still dead. I checked the car charger, nothing. My watch, the digital one I wore, read the right time, but the seconds hand stuttered oddly. Small things you notice when you're standing in the cold, like trying to make sense of something that looks almost deliberate. I walked to the guardrail and leaned over, looking down into the valley. The lights didn't move like planes. They drifted, but with purpose. Slight shifts in formation, drifting apart a few yards and closing again. When one would pulse, the others would dim a beat later, like a delayed echo. No sound carried up to the ridge. The valley was unnaturally silent. I mean that in the simplest way. No cars, no distant dogs, no radios. Even the wind seemed to have been pulled under a lid. At first, I told myself it might be a private party down on someone's property, those new LED yard decorations people get. But there were no other sounds. No flash of white columns from houses, nothing that made a human explanation fit cleanly. The lights were set over a place where there's only old apple orchards and last year's cornfield. Nothing worth a light show. I noticed a faint thrum in the air then, a vibration under my feet. It was low, not the kind of noise you'd hear as much as feel, like the distant rumble of a train through your ribs. It didn't come from a single direction. It seemed to be in the whole bowl of the valley, steady and measured. My phone, the one that had blinked dead, lit up for a second with an incoming call screen, then went black again. No name, no number. I stayed up there longer than I probably should have. The triangle of lights held position, drifting slow, as if they were pulling on some invisible strings. Every so often, one of them would flare, briefly brighter than before, and when that happened, the air around it took on a thin film, like heat shimmer, but colder. My ears popped once, a hollow little crack, but there was no change in pressure I could feel. Small, weird little things kept happening. My breath seemed to hang in the air longer, like the fogging of my jacket collar was delayed, and my flashlight, when I aimed it toward the lights, showed nothing. The beam cut through the dark but stopped short where the shimmer began. People in town like to say the mountain plays games with your head at night. I'd always laughed at that. On the ridge, alone, with your old car idling and your coffee long gone cold, there's a certain thinness to reason. Fine. Call it wind, or light refracting off a cold pocket, or rural radio towers. I tried the practical angles, then crossed them off one by one. The lights had a pattern that wasn't accidental, and whatever they were about, whoever or whatever placed them there, was spending attention on that valley for a while. Eventually, the cold crept into my bones, and I went back to the car. I wanted the heater and the normal hum of the engine, and the slight normal annoyance of living things. When I opened the door, the interior light came on like it always did, and the dash clock blinked 12 for a second before returning to the right time. I put the key into the ignition and turned. Nothing. Just a single pathetic click. I waited, turned again, listened for the starter's grating whine. The battery light on the dash came on and then off in a slow blink. I thought maybe the cold had taken my battery in the night. I cycled the key. Silence, except for that click. The radio dial, which had been fine, now stilled on a station that's usually alive with static, only static, and then a thin, high-pitched whine under it that matched the valley hum. I killed the ignition, stepped out again, and listened. The lights had done the same small drift while I was in the car. They hovered, gentle and patient. The valley was the same flat, muted bowl, except for the lights and that throb under everything. My hood pinged slightly as it cooled. I rubbed my hands together and tried the engine again. The click again. After the third time, my frustration edged into a different kind of fear. If the car wouldn't turn over, I could be out there with no signal, stranded on the shoulder. There was a one-bar icon on my phone when I opened it, then it sputtered and vanished. I pushed the hood release, pulled the latch, and popped the hood with cold fingers. The battery terminals looked fine, clamps tight, no corrosion. I jiggled the positive cable as a reflex. Nothing. There was a small humming beneath the engine bay that felt different than the valley thrum. It was sharper, as if something wanted to be heard but with a filter on it. The clock on the dash now read 12 solid, no seconds, like it had been reset to waiting. I should have called someone. I should have walked back down the road to the last house with a light. Instead, I sat on the bumper and watched the lights. I kept telling myself it was just a coincidence. Battery dying, cold, old car. But when another car went by on the highway a mile below, Its headlights didn't come into view the way they normally did. The road stayed black. The lights above the valley turned a shade brighter, and then dimmed one by one, as if whoever was tending them were watching me watch them. I tried to start the car again, and the same click answered me. Then when I looked up, one of the lights flared, the blue one this time, and the air shivered around it. The valley hummed louder for a beat. The car didn't start. My hands were on the key, breath fogging in quick little puffs. It took me a moment to notice that my voice sounded hollow when I said out loud, "This is ridiculous." The sound didn't travel far. Even my swear felt swallowed. That hush, absence of usual sound, made me want to move. I hopped into the driver's seat and snapped the dome light off, feeling foolish and exposed with every light on. I tried the starter one last time, the click. Then, as if someone finally let go of a string, the three lights in the valley dimmed to nearly nothing. They didn't move away, they just thinned as if curtains were being pulled. The hum eased and then stopped. The valley's blackness returned like a blanket dropped into place. The radio snapped from static to a faint AM station, carrying a late-night talk show in the exact place a heartbeat before there had been only a hiss. The phone, which had been a dead sliver, lit up again. I turned the key. The engine caught with a healthy, angry roar, and warm air hit my face. The dash clock hands resumed their normal march. For a moment, I sat there, fingers on the wheel, staring at the dark valley and trying to line up two different memories. Lights above like a slow constellation, and the ordinary blue of passing cars, and the humble, noisy certainty of my old engine. I drove slowly down the mountain. The road was wet up top, but clear on the switchbacks. My stomach didn't settle until I was past the last curve and could see the sodium glow of town spread out below. I pulled into my driveway later than I meant to and left the car running for a long time while I thought. Inside the house, the familiar noises returned. The hum of a refrigerator, a neighbor's muffled late-night TV, the kettle on the counter clicking off when it boiled. I made coffee and drank it standing in the kitchen, hands wrapped around the mug. In the morning, I went back up to the turnout. There were no skid marks, no scorch on the road, nothing unusual in the gravel. The valley looked like any valley you pass on your way home. Up close, there was no sign the lights had been anything but the mischief of a tired brain. The only physical remnant was a small circle of ground on the shoulder where the frost had melted in a neat ring under where my car had sat, as if the cold had been rearranged for a few hours. I didn't tell anyone at work that day. How could I? Say what? That lights hung in a valley and my car wouldn't start until they left? It would sound like boredom talking itself into a story. I told myself the sensible things. Battery on its way out, optics playing games in the dark, the mind trying to knit patterns out of unrelated threads. But that night, when I passed the ridge on the highway, I slowed down the same way I did before. Part of me wants to watch the valley for what's left of the night, and part of me wants to put as many miles between me and that bowl of dark as possible. I cannot explain why the engine refused to turn over while the lights were there, or why the valley held no ordinary sound. All I have is the memory, the three lights hovering, patient and slow, and the way the world around them seemed to pause until they were ready to move on. I was working night shift on Highway 58, just outside of Tehachapi. It was early March, around 2:30 in the morning, cold enough that the radio crackled a little every time I tried to adjust the volume. The stretch between Edison and Sand Canyon was dead quiet. Not a single car for miles. I'd pulled over at the turnout by mile marker 1 and 18 to sip some coffee and jot down notes for a minor accident report from earlier in the night. Dispatch came through with something simple: a possible abandoned vehicle on the eastbound side, about 1.5 miles up from where I was. Caller said it was stopped on the shoulder with hazard lights flashing, but no one around. Normally that's nothing. Happens all the time. People pull off to rest or break down, someone else calls it in. I told dispatch I'd check it out. The road there cuts through a dry valley, just cracked dirt, scattered scrub, and low hills that block most of the horizon. No lights, no houses, no reason to stop unless you're desperate. As I came up the incline, I saw it. A silver Toyota Camry, parked just barely off the white line, hazards still blinking. It struck me how still everything looked. Usually hazard lights make the whole scene feel alive, flashing off signs, lighting up the road surface. But out there, it was like the light didn't bounce off anything. The air looked thick, maybe? Hazy? Hard to describe. I parked behind it, turned on my spotlight, and called it in. 1029 on California 8HJP 721, I said. A few seconds later, dispatch came back, registered to a Robert D. Cole, Bakersfield. No wants, no warrants. I stepped out, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. Ozone, faint but sharp, like after a lightning strike. The second thing was the warmth. The air around the car wasn't cold like the rest of the night. My breath had been fogging up until then, but as I got closer, it stopped. I touched the hood with the back of my hand. Warm. Not hot, but like it had been running recently. I checked the driver's door, unlocked. The interior light came on. Keys were still in the ignition. No sign of struggle, no blood, nothing obviously wrong. There was a phone in the cup holder, screen cracked, and an open water bottle in the console. Everything looked recent. What bothered me most, though, was the way the driver's seat was pushed back. Not like someone short had been driving. It was fully reclined. I radioed again. Dispatch, I've got the vehicle, appears unoccupied. Engine's off, but still warm. I'll check the perimeter. I walked around the car with my flashlight. That's when I saw it. A perfect circular mark in the asphalt, maybe 3 feet in diameter, about 2 feet off the passenger side. The edges were crisp, not like a burn from a tire or a flare, just a smooth, blackened circle. At first, I figured maybe the car had overheated, maybe a fluid leak ignited somehow, but the mark wasn't under the engine. It was off to the side on clean road surface. I crouched down to look closer. The asphalt wasn't melted exactly, but it was darker and slightly rougher, like it had been exposed to intense heat for just a second. No debris, no residue. I took a few photos with my phone and stepped back. My radio hissed suddenly. A burst of static, then went silent. I checked it, thinking maybe I bumped the channel, but it was still on the right frequency. I said, Unit 24 to dispatch, do you copy? Nothing, just that faint hiss again. I walked a few feet away from the car, tried again. Nothing. I even stepped toward the shoulder facing the open valley, thinking maybe the hills were blocking the signal. Still nothing. Then from somewhere in the distance, I don't know how far, I heard this low, pulsing hum. Not mechanical, not like an engine. It was steady, too low to pinpoint. It seemed to fade in and out like it was circling, but the sound didn't travel with the wind. I tried to tell myself it was a generator from a nearby farm, but there aren't any farms out there. Just desert. The hum stopped for maybe 10 seconds, and in that silence, I swear I heard a faint crackling like static electricity. The hairs on my arms stood up. When I turned back toward the car, something about the headlights caught my eye. They weren't on, I hadn't turned them on, but there was a faint glow reflecting in the chrome around them, like light was coming from somewhere behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing. Just empty road and hills. The glow faded a second later. That's when I realized the hazard lights had stopped blinking. Both had frozen mid-flash, one bright, one dark. I walked closer and noticed the rear lights looked dimmer than before, almost like the battery was dying, but the car still had enough juice to power the interior light. I backed away and tried my radio again. Finally, I heard dispatch come through. Faint, crackling, but there. Copy that. Unit 24. Say again your traffic. I told them I'd found the car unoccupied with what looked like heat damage to the pavement. They told me to stay put until another unit could reach me. I stood by the hood, keeping my flashlight on the circle in the road. The air still smelled metallic. Every few seconds, I thought I saw the edges of the circle shimmer a little, like heat waves on asphalt in summer. I even held my hand over it, didn't feel any warmth. About 10 minutes later, the other unit arrived, Officer Jimenez. As soon as his headlights came into view, I felt the air change again. It got cold all at once, like stepping out of a sauna. My breath came back visible again. He parked behind me, got out, and immediately asked, "You feel that?" I just nodded. We both walked over and I pointed out the burn mark. He crouched to look at it, touched the surface with a glove, and said, "Weird. It's not even hot." We went over the car again, checked the trunk, the back seat, the ditches. No sign of the driver. Jimenez took photos of the circle with his phone, too. I remember him saying, Looks too clean to be from a flare. You said it was like that when you got here? I told him yes, and that the car had been warm. When we were wrapping up, I noticed something small near the edge of the mark. A little black fragment like melted plastic. I picked it up with a pen and bagged it for evidence. It was weightless, brittle, smelled faintly like burnt copper. We had the car towed out at first light. The tow guy, a guy named Reggie I'd known for years, said the undercarriage looked fine. No burn damage underneath. No fluid leaks. Just a faint scorched patch on the passenger side fender, like a cigarette had been held there too long. I filed the report like any other abandoned vehicle. We tagged it as possible mechanical failure. The owner, Robert Cole, didn't answer his phone for 2 days. When he finally did, he told Bakersfield PD that he'd sold the car a week before to a guy who paid cash. No bill of sale, no contact info. A few weeks later, the evidence tech who'd examined that plastic fragment said it didn't match any automotive materials. They logged it as unknown polymer. The strangest part? When I went back to that stretch of highway a month later, just out of curiosity, the burn mark was gone. Completely. Asphalt looked brand new, like it had been resurfaced, but the county had no record of maintenance there. I still have the photos on my phone. The circle looks darker every time I look at it, like it's absorbing the light somehow. And every so often, when I'm on that same stretch of road at night, the radio will hiss for a few seconds, and the temperature in the cruiser will spike, just enough to make me glance at the shoulder, at nothing. I woke up around 3 in the morning to this low, steady static coming from the little radio on my nightstand. I hadn't left it on. I never do. It's an old shortwave receiver I keep by the bed, something I mess with sometimes when I can't sleep, just tuning through random frequencies, picking up weird chatter or air traffic. But I hadn't touched it in days. The static wasn't loud, just a faint hiss, like a weak signal drifting in and out. For a minute I lay there, half asleep, thinking maybe it had switched on by itself somehow. I reached over and flicked the power knob off. The static kept going. That woke me up fast. I stared at the radio, waiting for it to fade, but the sound didn't change. It wasn't coming from the speaker anymore. It was coming from outside. It had that same fuzzy texture, but softer, like it was mixed with the wind. I got out of bed and stood still for a few seconds, just listening. My room was dark, the only light coming from the faint orange glow of the street lamp outside. The sound seemed to be coming from the direction of my window, not inside the room, outside. I went over and pulled the curtain back. My house backs up to a small field that slopes down toward a tree line. At night, it's just pitch black, no lights at all, except for the road lamp near my driveway. Usually, I can hear frogs and crickets this time of year, but right then, there was nothing. No bugs, no wind, just that thin layer of static drifting through the air. I opened the window halfway. It was cool out, the kind of cold you feel more on your skin than in your breath. The static got clearer when I leaned out. It wasn't like a normal electrical noise. It had rhythm, uneven, like a faint signal trying to lock onto something. I stood there for a while, just listening. Then I noticed something else. Every few seconds, the sound would dip, almost like someone turning a dial. And during those dips, I thought I could hear another noise underneath. Tiny clicks or pops spaced evenly apart. Not mechanical, exactly, but deliberate. I turned my porch light on and stepped outside barefoot. The air smelled like rain, even though the sky was clear. The static was louder out there, coming from somewhere past the edge of the yard. The field behind my place is maybe 2 acres, surrounded by barbed wire and trees. There's nothing out there. No houses, no power lines, no equipment. Just grass and the old wooden fence that marks the boundary. But when I looked out toward the center of the field, I saw something reflecting faintly, like metal catching light. It wasn't bright, more like a dull sheen, easy to miss if you weren't staring straight at it. The shape was hard to make out. Roundish. Still, the static pulsed again. Each time it did, the reflection seemed to flicker with it. Not in sync, but close enough that my brain linked them. I walked down off the porch and crossed the yard slowly. The grass was wet with dew, and my feet were freezing, but I didn't really notice. I was just focused on that sound. It wasn't coming from the object itself. It felt like it was coming from the air around it. Halfway across the yard, I realized the static had changed. There was a low hum underneath now. It wasn't a tone I could identify, more like vibration through the ground. The closer I got, the more I felt it in my chest. Panic hit me for the first time then. I stopped walking and just stood there. Everything was too quiet, except for that noise. The air felt thick, like the kind of stillness before a storm, but heavier somehow. I turned around to look at my house. All the lights I'd left on, the porch, the lamp in my room, looked dimmer. Not flickering, just muted. Then the static cut out completely. Silence hit so suddenly it made me dizzy. I remember swallowing and hearing that tiny sound too loud in my own ears. For maybe 10 seconds, there was nothing. Then a single, short burst of static came again. Sharper this time, and something in the field shifted. It wasn't big, just a movement like something adjusting position. The reflection I'd been staring at slid slightly to the left, smooth and soundless. That's when I ran back toward the house. I didn't look behind me. I slammed the door, locked it, and stood there trying to hear anything over my heartbeat. But the sound didn't follow. I went to the window again, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek out. The reflection was gone. The field looked empty, but the static had started again, fainter now, coming from deeper in the trees. It faded gradually over the next few minutes until all I could hear were the frogs starting back up like whatever had happened was over and the world was rebooting itself. I stayed up the rest of the night. Didn't even try to sleep. Around 5, just before dawn, I went outside again. The grass where I'd walked was still wet, but out in the field there was a wide circle where the dew had dried up completely. The grass wasn't burned or flattened, just dry, like it had been warm there. I didn't step into it. I just stood at the fence watching the sun come up. Later that day, I checked the radio. It turned on fine, but every station had more static than usual. Even strong local ones were buried under faint noise. I unplugged it, thinking maybe it had picked up moisture somehow, but when I plugged it back in, I caught something weird. Right between frequencies, there was this short, repeating signal. 3 soft bursts, then a pause, then 2 more. It was so faint you had to lean in close to hear it. I recorded a bit on my phone, but when I played it back, there was nothing. Just silence. I didn't tell anyone. What was I supposed to say? That my radio picked up a sound that moved into my yard? That night, I left the radio unplugged. I sat up reading in the living room until after midnight, just waiting to see if the noise would start again. It didn't. Everything was normal. Around 2, I finally went to bed. The house was quiet, and I felt stupid for being on edge. I just started to doze off when I heard it again, very faint through the window. Not the static this time, just the clicking underneath it. 5 sharp clicks spaced perfectly apart, then silence. The next morning, I walked the field again. The dry circle was gone, but I noticed something else I hadn't before. Small impressions in the dirt near where the grass had been warm, not footprints. They were too shallow and evenly spaced, almost like marks from a tripod, except there were 4 of them, each about the size of a coffee mug base, sunk maybe half an inch. They didn't lead anywhere, just 4 marks in the shape of a square a few feet apart, right where I'd seen the reflection. I didn't sleep well the rest of that week. Every night I'd wake up around 3, listen hard, and hear nothing. But the silence never felt right, like there was something missing under it. On Thursday, I tried turning the radio back on again, just to check. Every station was clear, no static. But when I turned the tuning knob slowly across the bands, there was one spot right in between 2 frequencies where everything went dead quiet for a split second. Not static, not noise. Just total silence, sharp and absolute. And in that half second, before the static came back, I could have sworn I heard a faint hum, like something far off was matching the signal. Then it was gone. I unplugged the radio and put it in the closet. It's still there, covered with an old towel. I haven't heard the static since, but some nights, when the wind dies completely and the crickets stop for a few seconds, I'll catch myself straining to listen. It's not that I expect to hear it again. It's that sometimes, when everything gets quiet enough, it feels like I already do. I was driving through the desert on my way to visit my brother in Tucson. It was early spring, late at night, one of those drives where the sky feels endless and the road just disappears into it. I'd left from Barstow around 10 p.m., planning to make it most of the way before sleeping in the back of my truck. It was warm out, dry enough that I had the windows cracked just to get some air moving. There wasn't much out there, just sand, scrub, and the occasional cluster of dark rocks that looked like distant buildings until you got close. Around midnight, I stopped at a gas station near Amboy for coffee and a bathroom break. The place was half lit, one flickering bulb buzzing above the door. The guy behind the counter looked half asleep, but nodded when I walked in. I bought a bottle of water, a cup of coffee, and a pack of jerky. When I came back out, the desert had gone completely still. The air felt heavier than before, like the wind had just stopped. The highway out of Amboy was straight for miles. I put on some low music, an old playlist I kept for road trips, and zoned out. Headlights sweeping across the empty asphalt. Every few minutes, I'd pass a mile marker, then nothing but dark again. I didn't see another car for nearly half an hour. Somewhere around midnight 30, I noticed a faint glow in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was another car coming up behind me, but the light didn't look right. It wasn't the white of headlights. It was softer, pale yellow, almost like the color of a full moon behind clouds. It stayed distant for a while, maybe a mile back. After another few minutes, it seemed closer. I glanced back, expecting to see a pair of headlights by then, but it was just one round light, perfectly centered in my mirror. It didn't bounce or shift like headlights do on uneven ground. It was steady, dead even with the road. I turned down the music and rolled the window up. The silence inside the cab made the hum of the tires louder, more rhythmic. The light behind me held its distance, bright enough that I could see the edge of its glow stretching across the asphalt. I couldn't tell if it was high in the air or low to the ground. It looked like it floated somewhere between. I tapped the brakes once to see if whoever it was would react. The light didn't change. A few more miles passed, the road curved slightly to the right, and I took the turn fast enough that anything behind me should have shifted out of view, but it didn't. When I straightened out, the light was still there. Same spot in the mirror, same distance, same intensity. I slowed down to 50. It slowed too. I sped up to 75, the engine whining a little. Still there. Always perfectly behind me, like it was attached by an invisible string. By then, my hands were slick on the steering wheel. I cracked the window again, trying to hear anything. An engine, maybe, but there was nothing except the steady sound of my own tires. The desert on both sides of the highway stretched out flat and pale under the moonlight. Not a single building or car in sight. About 10 minutes later, I decided to pull over. There was a wide gravel shoulder on the right side. I flipped my blinker on out of habit and eased to a stop, headlights cutting across the scrub. The glow behind me stayed steady until my tires stopped turning. Then it blinked out. Just gone. At first, I thought maybe it had ducked behind a rise or a curve, but the road behind me was straight and empty. I stepped out of the truck, the warm air hitting me in the face. I left the door open and stood by the cab, watching the horizon. Nothing. The desert was dead quiet. No wind, no insects, not even the distant hum of power lines. The kind of quiet that feels like it's pressing against your eardrums. I turned in a slow circle, scanning every direction. The stars were out, bright, sharp, spread across the sky like salt. The highway stretched out behind me in a thin silver line, disappearing into the dark. I walked a few steps onto the asphalt, my boots crunching against small pebbles. Still nothing. I climbed back in the truck, shut the door, and sat there with the engine idling. My watch said 1:07 a.m. I stared into the mirror for a while, waiting for something to reappear. After maybe 5 minutes, I reached for my coffee cup and froze. The desert was still silent, but I could feel something change. A faint vibration under my seat, almost too subtle to notice. It wasn't the engine. I know what that feels like. This was different. It came and went in short waves, like a distant train moving underground. Then, off to my right, about 100 yards away, a dim light began to form above the scrub. It wasn't round this time, more like an oval, pulsing faintly, glowing from within. It rose slowly, maybe 10 feet, then hovered. I could see the outline of the desert beneath it faintly illuminated. I killed the headlights. My hands shook doing it. The inside of the cab went dark, and the only light was that pale glow outside. It hovered there for a few seconds, then drifted sideways across the highway, smooth and silent. It didn't cast shadows, it didn't make a sound, just moved steady and deliberate like it was scanning the ground. I don't know why, but I rolled my window down again. The air outside smelled like dust and something faintly metallic, almost like rain on steel. The hair on my arms lifted. I remember trying to convince myself it was some kind of drone, maybe from a nearby military range. But there was no red or green indicator light, no engine noise, nothing mechanical about it. The glow dimmed, then brightened again, 3 times, slow and even, and then faded completely. The second it vanished, the sound came back. Crickets, the faint whisper of wind moving through the brush. It was like the world unpaused. I sat there for a long time, staring into the dark. My phone was sitting in the cup holder. The screen was black, even though it had been plugged in the whole drive. When I hit the power button, nothing happened. I checked the charger cable, fine. Then I noticed the dashboard clock flashing 12, like the power had cut and reset itself. I turned the truck off and back on. Everything worked again, but the radio had reset too. The clock read 2:04. I checked my watch, 1:31. I couldn't tell which was right. I started driving again, slowly at first, checking the mirror every few seconds. The stars looked normal, the road normal. After maybe 10 minutes, I saw a faint set of headlights far ahead, somebody coming the other way. I don't know why, but seeing them made me feel relieved. The car passed. Just a beat-up sedan, 2 people inside. I glanced at them as they went by. They didn't look back. About 20 miles later, I pulled into a rest stop near Desert Center. A few trucks were parked in the lot, engines rumbling softly. I parked between them and sat there with the window cracked, trying to calm down. My phone had come back on by then, but when I looked at the lock screen, it said 3:12 a.m. I couldn't remember the last 30 or 40 minutes of the drive. I must have zoned out, but I didn't remember a single turn, not even passing the last few exits. When the sun came up, I walked around the truck before heading out again. There was a thin layer of dust on the paint, normal for desert driving, but the rear window had something strange on it. A faint white smear shaped like a curve, almost like the outline of a hand, but too large and too smooth. I wiped it with my sleeve, and it came off like chalk. The rest of the drive to Tucson was uneventful. No lights, no strange sounds. But that night, when I parked outside my brother's place, I noticed something small I hadn't before. The clock in my truck still wouldn't hold the right time. No matter how many times I set it, it drifted ahead exactly 33 minutes by the next morning. Every time. I eventually sold that truck, but sometimes when I'm driving long stretches of highway after dark, I still find myself checking the mirror too often. It's not like I expect to see anything, but when the road's empty and the sky feels too big, it's hard not to look. It happened 2 summers ago, late July. I was renting a cabin near Lake Manan in Idaho, one of those small Airbnbs tucked back along the tree line with a deck facing the water. It wasn't much, 1 bedroom, old furniture, spotty Wi-Fi, but I'd gone there to get away for a week, so that was fine by me. The lake itself was shallow and quiet, more like a wide pond. There were maybe 5 or 6 cabins spaced far apart along the shore, most of them empty except for one family across the lake who had a small dock and a pontoon boat. The first few days were normal. I fished, grilled on the deck, sat outside at night watching the stars. I liked how still everything was after sunset. No traffic, no city noise, just the occasional bullfrog or mosquito buzzing near the porch light. The second to last night I was there, though, something weird happened. It started around 10:30 p.m. I was sitting on the deck with a beer, scrolling through my phone, when I noticed a soft glow reflecting on the water. I thought at first it was the moon coming out from behind clouds, but when I looked up, the moon was on the opposite side of the sky, hidden behind trees. This light was coming from out over the lake, low, maybe 30 feet above the water. It wasn't bright, exactly, more like a hazy white shimmer, the way headlights look through fog. It wasn't moving much, just hovering, shifting slightly like it was floating in a breeze. I stood up and leaned against the railing. There was no sound at all, not even insects. The whole lake seemed muted. After a minute or two, I grabbed my phone and started recording. I remember trying to zoom in, but the picture just went blurry. You could still make out the reflection on the water, though, a soft oval of light rippling slightly. I recorded for maybe 40 seconds before it started to dim, like someone turning down a dimmer switch, then it just went out. Total darkness again. I stayed outside another 15 minutes, staring at the spot where it had been, but nothing came back. Eventually, I went inside, locked the door, and sat on the couch for a while. I didn't feel scared exactly, just uneasy. It was too quiet, even the frogs hadn't started up again. When I went to bed, I left the blinds open so I could see the lake. Around 2 a.m., I woke up for no reason. The room was faintly lit from the moon now, and I could see my reflection in the window. Behind me, on the water, there was a pale shimmer again, smaller this time, like a single point of light drifting along the surface. I blinked a few times, but it didn't go away. It moved in a straight line from left to right, then vanished behind the trees. I didn't record that one. I just watched it until it disappeared. Then I lay there a long time, listening. Still no sounds outside, not even the usual creaks of the cabin. The next morning, I got up early. The air smelled like wet wood, and the lake was covered in a thin layer of mist. I made coffee and sat at the table while it burned off. The whole thing from the night before kept running through my head, so after breakfast, I pulled up the video on my phone to look at it again. When it started playing, I thought maybe I'd clicked the wrong file, because the screen just showed darkness. I scrubbed forward, but there was nothing. No light, no reflection, just a faint outline of the lake under moonlight. I replayed it twice more, squinting at the screen, thinking maybe the exposure had messed up. But the weird part wasn't that the light was missing, it was the sound. In the background, under the faint rustle of wind in the water, there was this low humming. Not mechanical, not like an engine. It pulsed, slow and even, like a deep note being played on repeat. The sound rose and fell rhythmically, maybe once every second. It wasn't something I'd noticed when I was actually out there recording. The night had been dead silent, but through the phone speaker it was clear as day. I replayed it through my earbuds, trying to figure out what it reminded me of. It almost sounded like when you blow across the top of a glass bottle, but lower, more drawn out. I walked around the cabin holding the phone, listening to make sure it wasn't interference or the fan or something. But the fan was off, and when I recorded a test clip from the deck, it was quiet except for birds. I even tried playing the clip back through my laptop to see if the sound was just an artifact of my phone speaker. Same thing, that low hum, steady and slow through the entire video. That night, I went back out to the deck around the same time, hoping maybe I'd see it again. The sky was clear, the lake calm, the moon was brighter. I kept my phone on the railing, camera ready. For about an hour, nothing happened. Then, around 11:20, I started hearing that same humming, but faint, like it was coming from far out over the lake. It was so quiet I thought I might be imagining it, but it grew slightly louder, still that same rhythm, low and even. The water looked normal. No light, no movement, just darkness. I recorded again, sweeping the camera across the lake, whispering to myself, trying to pick up any sound. I didn't see anything unusual. After about 2 minutes, the humming just faded out. I stayed up another hour, but it didn't return. When I checked the new video the next morning, it was the same thing. Completely dark, except for the faint reflection of the moon, and that same pulsing hum. Only this time it sounded closer, like it was right under the deck. I could hear tiny vibrations between the pulses, like wood creaking. I saved the files and tried running a noise reduction filter on my laptop, thinking maybe I could isolate the frequency. All it did was make the sound clearer. You could hear tiny clicks beneath it, uneven and irregular, like tapping from inside a hollow surface. That afternoon, I walked around the shoreline looking for anything. A buoy, a piece of equipment, maybe a generator from one of the other cabins. There was nothing out there, just driftwood, mud, and reeds. I saw a few small fish near the shallows, but no boats, no debris, no reason for there to be light or sound the night before. When I looked across the lake toward the cabin opposite mine, I saw something that made me stop for a second. The people staying there, the same family I'd seen earlier in the week, were all standing near their dock, staring at the water. 2 adults and a kid. The man had a phone out, pointing it toward the lake. They stayed that way for maybe 30 seconds, then turned and went inside. I thought about walking around to ask what they'd seen, but it was a long walk around the shore and I didn't want to seem like a creep. That night was my last one there. Around 9 p.m., I packed most of my stuff so I could leave early in the morning. Before going to bed, I stepped out onto the deck one more time. The lake was calm again, mirror flat. I didn't see any light or hear any sound. But when I leaned on the railing, I noticed something strange, a faint vibration in the wood. Not enough to make a noise, but steady, almost like a heartbeat against my hand. It stopped after maybe 10 seconds. I didn't sleep much that night. Around 4 in the morning, I gave up and made coffee, sitting by the window until dawn. The mist was back, thicker this time. For a while, I thought I could see faint ripples moving across the lake, like something just under the surface was gliding through. It could have been wind, but the trees weren't moving. When I drove out later that morning, I passed the road that led to the other cabins. I slowed down, looking for the family's place across the water. Their car was gone. The dock was empty. Once I got home, I tried showing the video to a few friends. Everyone heard the same thing: the humming, the pulses, the clicking. A couple of them said it reminded them of sonar or underwater recordings. I tried uploading it online once, but for some reason the audio wouldn't process properly. It just came out as static. I still have the files on my laptop. I listen to them every now and then, trying to pick out patterns. Sometimes I think I can hear faint movement behind the hum, like something shifting in water. Other times it just sounds like a long, slow breath. I never figured out what it was, but whenever I'm near a lake now, especially at night, I notice how the silence feels. How sometimes, even when you think it's quiet, there's a rhythm underneath it. Steady, patient, waiting to be heard. I started hiking that morning around 5. It was mid-September, just before the mornings started getting too cold, and the sun wasn't up yet when I parked at the trailhead. The place was called Maple Ridge, just outside a small town in Montana where my cousin lived. He'd told me the view from the summit was best right after sunrise, so I wanted to catch it. There was no one else in the lot, which didn't surprise me. It was a weekday, and the air was cold enough that my breath came out in little clouds. The first part of the trail wound through pine trees that blocked most of the sky. Everything smelled like damp dirt and sap. I had a thermos of coffee clipped to my pack, and every few minutes I'd stop to take a sip just to warm up. The woods were quiet, aside from the occasional creak of trees or crunch of gravel under my boots. I remember thinking it was peaceful, almost too still, but in a good way. Then, about 20 minutes in, I noticed something odd. There was a deer standing off to the right side of the trail, maybe 30 feet back in the trees. At first, I didn't think much of it. I'd seen plenty of deer around there, but this one wasn't moving. It was a young doe, and it just stood there perfectly still, facing uphill. Even when I stopped walking, it didn't twitch or flinch like deer usually do when they notice you. I watched it for a few seconds, waiting for it to bolt. Nothing. I even coughed quietly to see if it would react, but it didn't. That's when I realized its head was tilted slightly upward, eyes fixed on something above the tree line. I turned to look. Through the gaps in the branches, I could see the sky starting to lighten, that pale blue you get just before sunrise. And there, faintly visible against it, were 3 small lights. They weren't bright like stars or plane lights. They looked almost hazy, like glowing marbles moving slowly behind a thin layer of fog. At first, I thought they were just stars, and I was imagining the movement. But they were definitely shifting. Not randomly, either. They moved together, sliding into a triangular formation, then separating, then drifting back. Slow and smooth, like they were connected somehow. I kept staring, trying to make sense of it. The deer hadn't moved an inch. I remember feeling this weird sense of calm and unease at the same time, like my brain couldn't decide if what I was seeing was normal. Then, just as the horizon started to glow orange, the lights faded. Not all at once, they dimmed one by one until the sky looked empty again. The deer blinked, turned its head, and walked off into the woods. I stood there for another minute before pulling out my phone to check the time. 5:42 a.m. I thought about taking a photo, but the lights were gone by then, and all I would have gotten was a shot of the trees. I kept hiking. The trail got steeper, and as the light came up, everything looked normal again. Birds started chirping, and I passed a few rabbits darting through the brush. Still, I couldn't stop replaying what I'd seen. By the time I reached the overlook, the sun was up. The lake below was covered in mist, and the peaks across from me were glowing orange in the light. I tried to relax and enjoy it, but something about that moment earlier wouldn't leave my head. Mostly the deer. The way it had stood there so still. I sat on a rock to eat breakfast, a granola bar and a banana, and texted my cousin, Matt, to tell him I was at the top. No signal. I figured I'd message him when I got back down. After resting a bit, I started heading back the same way I came. It was full daylight now, bright and clear. But about halfway down, I noticed something strange again. In a patch of dirt near the trail, there were prints, not mine, and not from boots. They looked like deer tracks at first, but there were a few that didn't make sense. They were spaced far apart, deeper than they should have been, and a couple looked uneven, like something heavy had pressed down one side more than the other. I crouched to look closer, but the ground was damp from dew, and the edges had softened. Still, they didn't look right. That's when I heard it, a low, humming noise, faint but steady. It sounded like wind passing through power lines, except there were no lines out there. I stood up and turned around, thinking maybe it was coming from some equipment or a generator nearby, but there was nothing, just trees. The sound lasted maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. Everything went quiet again. I decided to keep walking. A few minutes later, I passed the same spot where I'd seen the deer earlier. The area looked the same, except now there were two small patches of flattened grass right off the trail, maybe 3 feet wide each, like something had pressed down evenly in circles. I couldn't tell if it was related, but it made me pick up the pace anyway. The rest of the hike down was uneventful. When I reached the trailhead, 2 cars were parked next to mine. A couple of older guys were unloading fishing gear, and I almost asked if they'd seen anything weird that morning, but I stopped myself. It would have sounded stupid. When I got back to my cousin's place, I told him about it anyway. Matt's one of those guys who loves to tease, so I tried to keep it casual. Said something like, "Hey, we ever see lights out by Maple Ridge?" He asked what kind, and I told him. 3 faint orbs moving together. He shrugged and said he hadn't. Then he joked about me getting up too early and seeing satellites. That was fine by me. I didn't want to argue. But later that night, when we were sitting on his porch having a beer, he mentioned something that stuck with me. "There's a guy over in town," he said. "Used to do night hikes out that way. Said he stopped a couple years back after he heard something. Said it was like a generator that started and stopped out of nowhere. No houses nearby or anything. Scared the hell out of him." I asked if the guy ever said what he thought it was, and Matt just shrugged. "Probably nothing," he said. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing the deer, how its neck had been stretched upward, how its body didn't twitch once. I pulled up a photo of the trail on my phone just to look at it in the dark, and when I checked the time at the top of the screen, it said 5:42 a.m. That same number from the morning. I don't know why, but it made me uncomfortable enough that I flipped the phone over. The next day, I drove back out toward the trail just to see it again in daylight. I didn't hike, just parked by the sign and looked up through the trees. There were a few clouds drifting across the sky, but nothing else. No sound, no strange feeling. On the drive back, I kept thinking about how slow those lights had moved, how perfectly smooth their motion was. Not like planes or drones. Just a steady, gliding pattern, completely synchronized. I tried to remember if there'd been wind, but I couldn't. Everything about that morning felt quiet in a way that's hard to describe. I went home the day after that. I didn't talk about it much afterward. Not because I thought people wouldn't believe me, but because I didn't really know how to explain it without making it sound like a dream. Sometimes, when I wake up early and step outside before sunrise, I find myself looking up just for a second. Most mornings, there's nothing but stars and clouds. But once in a while, if the air's still enough, I swear I catch a faint shimmer. 3 soft points drifting in slow circles before fading into the dawn. I was working the night shift at the Westfield Mall security office. Nothing unusual at first. My name's Marcus Holt. I've done this kind of job long enough to get used to the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional drunken shopper stumbling past the cameras. That night, the air outside was wet with drizzle. The kind of late October rain that makes everything feel colder than it should. And I was sipping coffee, watching the monitors like any other Tuesday. Around 2:15 a.m., I noticed something odd on the lot camera covering the northeast corner. There was a dark blue sedan parked near one of the far entrances, engine idling, lights on. Nothing strange so far, except that the spot had been empty 5 minutes before. I kept watching. The driver, a man in a brown jacket, wasn't moving. He just sat there, staring straight ahead, hands on the wheel. I shrugged, making a note to check the license plate later. Not unusual for someone to sit in their car at this hour. Then, at 2:18, the car vanished. Poof, just gone. The lot was empty. The camera feed didn't glitch. The time code kept running. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Maybe it was a reflection, maybe a digital error, but nothing on the other cameras showed the car leaving. I called it in on the radio to my coworker, James, who was monitoring the south lot. "Did you see the blue sedan in the northeast corner?" I asked. "Blue sedan? What are you talking about?" he replied. "It's gone now, just disappeared." Maybe it moved. Can't see it from here. I checked the footage again. The car was gone. For a full 2 minutes, not on any camera, not moving, not anywhere. Then at 2:20, it reappeared in the exact same spot. Engine still running, lights on, the man still in the seat. Nothing around him had changed. No rain pattern, no cars moved near him, nothing. He hadn't driven away. I froze. I rewound the feed slowly. 2 minutes of nothing, the lot just sitting there wet and empty. Then, bam, the car, like someone had pressed a reappear button. I called him on the radio. "Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle for a minute, please." There was no answer. I called again, then grabbed the channel from mall security. James and I both watched him on the monitor. He hadn't moved, not an inch. I considered calling the cops, but figured I'd just check the footage, confirm it wasn't a glitch. I went down to the northeast corner, the rain cold on my jacket. The man was still sitting there, engine idling, just looking straight ahead. "Sir, the cameras," I said, voice tight. Did you move your car at all?" He looked at me like I'd asked the weirdest question ever. "Nope. Engine's been running the whole time. I didn't touch the car." I blinked at him. "Okay, you didn't leave?" "Nope." I pointed toward the camera. "Because on footage, you weren't here for 2 minutes." He frowned. "I don't understand. I've been sitting here the whole time. Look, the heater's on, engine's still running. I was listening to the radio." I nodded slowly. The rain had stopped, leaving a fine mist hanging over the asphalt. Everything looked normal. Puddles reflecting the fluorescent lot lights, nothing unusual. I double-checked the cameras. No other cars moved, no shadows, nothing. It was like those 2 minutes had been erased. I ran through every possible explanation in my head. Digital glitch? Maybe. I checked the DVR logs, no error messages, no dropped frames, no skipped seconds. The feed was solid, power steady. I went back inside, still unsettled. James was watching the footage again, his coffee forgotten. "That's impossible," he said finally. "The car didn't move. You saw it. I saw it. 2 minutes. Gone. And back in the same spot." I nodded. "I know." The man eventually drove off around 2:40, same direction he'd been facing. No sudden movement, nothing out of place. But I couldn't shake the feeling something had shifted. 2 minutes had passed, but it felt like more, like the time in that corner of the lot didn't follow the same rules. I tried to go back to my normal routine, but I kept glancing at the monitors, watching empty spaces for signs of the impossible. The DVR footage stayed on my mind, the way the car vanished cleanly, leaving no trail, no evidence of movement, nothing. The hum of the fluorescent lights in the security room felt too loud. Later, I asked the mall manager if anyone else had noticed anything odd. He laughed it off. "Parking lots are weird at night," he said. "People get confused, cameras glitch, nothing to worry about." I wanted to believe that, really, I did. But I watched the footage again when I got home, alone, the house quiet. 2 minutes, not a single frame of the car anywhere else. Then suddenly, right back in the exact spot. Engine running, lights on. The man swore he hadn't stopped the engine. The footage agreed in a way I couldn't explain. And I don't know why, but I can't get that thought out of my head. Something in that lot, that night, didn't follow the rules. Whatever it wasn't a trick of the cameras. It wasn't human error, and it wasn't the car moving. I keep thinking about that corner of the lot, the wet asphalt, the mist, the car just gone. 2 minutes. Nothing. And then back. The DVR proves it. The driver proves it. And yet, nothing else makes sense. I haven't seen anything like it since, and I don't think I want to. But every time I walk the lot alone, especially late at night, I check that northeast corner first, half expecting the impossible to happen again. I launched the drone off the cliff like I always did, gentle throttle until it cleared the scrub and folded into the wind. It was one of those late September evenings where the sun went quick and hard, the sort of dusk that turns everything slick with color for maybe 10 minutes and then it's gone. I wanted the light on the clouds over the bay, that thin band where the marine layer sits low and the boats look like toys. I've flown 100 times from that bluff. The takeoff spot is a small scrub patch with a view of the coastline and the radio tower 2 miles inland if you squint. My name's Eli. I do landscaping by day and fly drones by habit whenever I need a small private thing to focus on. The Phantom hummed steady. I had my controller, goggles, and my phone tethered for telemetry. The wind was light off the water, the gusts predictable. I took her up to about 400 feet, the legal limit for what I like to do recreationally, and I banked out over the ocean. From that altitude, the clouds looked like a sleeping city, a soft white roof, and the sun, still stubborn, was a flat line of orange behind them. I was tracing a slow half circle with the camera, keeping the horizon level, thinking about nothing special. Then I saw something. At first, it was just a bright pixel against the cloud deck, like a speck of lens flare from the sun, but it didn't behave like a flare. It was a single point of white catching the light, steady and small, high above the clouds, too high to be a plane and too bright to be a star at that hour. I nudged the camera up to get a wider angle. The object stayed where it was, reflecting the sun like a tiny mirror. That was odd enough to make me slow everything down. I called it in aloud to no one. There's something up there, because talking keeps you grounded. I zoomed in. It looked like a little coin, flat and bright, nothing mechanical like wings or blinking strobes. It didn't flash, it didn't leave a trail. It just hung reflective, catching the sun with a calm I couldn't place. I checked telemetry. Altitude read 410 feet, GPS solid, battery at 82%. Signal strength read strong, but the RC link indicator blipped pale yellow once and then returned green. I made a mental note and kept watching. Small things matter when you fly. Glitches always start small. A flock of terns crossed the field of view below me, black little commas against the cloud layer. As they passed, the object's reflection didn't change. It stayed still, like nothing had passed under it. The terns made their usual noise, sharp little calls that came through my goggles as thin, high sounds. But when they were gone, there was a different kind of quiet. Not silence. There was always wind and the motor hum, but the ordinary rustle of life felt muted, attenuated, in a way I couldn't explain. I told myself I was being dramatic. I panned the camera to track the horizon and then back up to the object. That's when the first real weirdness happened. I moved the gimbal smoothly up, and for a second, the object was gone from the feed. The sky where it had been was empty. My fingers tightened on the controls. I panned a degree left, and there it was again, no more than a speck. But now, it was lower in the frame, as if it had shifted closer to the drone. I frowned. I eased the craft forward 20 feet just to get a better sense of relative position. Seconds later, with a soft nudge on the right stick to sweep the camera up, the object appeared behind the drone. Not in front of me, not off in the distance, behind the drone. That sentence is how it felt, because what happened on the feed matched what my eyes saw in the goggles. One frame I was looking at clouds and a bright spot high above. The next frame, the bright spot was in the lower left of the screen, right where the drone's rear left prop arc should be. The object sat just beyond the tail, reflecting light at an angle that made no sense. I reflexively swung the bird around to look back, switched to yaw input, and banked a smooth turn. But on the goggles there was that same tiny mirror glint, almost cheeky, perched behind my craft. My heart kicked up. The Phantom is a predictable machine. It doesn't surprise you like that. I thumbed the sticks to yaw 180 degrees. The hillside came into view, then the distant radio tower, and the object wasn't there. My hands hovered. Behind me, in actual sky, there was only cloud and the last wash of sun. I hit pause on the recording function, which is as much reflex as habit. The SD card light flicked solid, then the recording resumed, but the object stayed gone. I backed the craft off a few feet and checked the live telemetry. Nothing abnormal. GPS, attitude, yaw, nothing to indicate a phantom echo. The RC signal held steady on the phone gauge. The goggles registered all the usual overlays: altitude, speed, distance. The object had been out near the cloud deck. Now it had been behind the drone. There was no blur, no trail. It just occupied a different position. I should have Arth return to home id then. 1,000 pilots' rules live in your brain, and one of them is when weird things happen, bring it home. Instead, I hovered, taken by a stupid combination of curiosity and the feeling that something outside you should be witnessed. I nudged up and rotated slowly, watching the horizon. For maybe 30 seconds, nothing changed. The object did not reappear. That's when the controller beeped. Not the standard low battery chirp I'd watched that bar. This was a short, sharp tone like a message pop. The phone screen flashed a text from my provider. Signal lost in your last known area. Signal lost, but my link showed full bars. I looked down for a heartbeat, and when I looked up again, the object was there, behind the drone, bright and still, right where it had been before. I swear to the oddness of that moment. The text, the quickness of me looking away, the object cropping the edge of the frame. I swung the drone around once more. Gone. I circled slowly 3 times, recorder running, hands steady only because the motor gives you a physical anchor. Each time, the camera would show nothing, and then, if I lifted the gimbal with a particular subtle motion, the object would resolve behind the craft for a breath. It was almost like the feed had a blind spot that the object could step into or out of. I thought about interference, RF bouncing off the cliffs, my drone's telemetry overlay glitching. I thought about a mirage, refraction off the marine layer. I thought about 1,000 practical things, because it's easier to clasp concrete explanations in your hands than to let your brain float in the uncanny. I even tried toggling the controller's frequency mode, switching channels, which made the Phantom twitch politely, and the object stayed put behind me for a second, then was gone. No one below on the beach was waving, no lights on the radio tower were flashing, no other craft in view. When I finally decided enough was enough, I brought the drone home with deliberate, slow inputs. I watched the feed all the way to landing. The craft cut down through a thin veil of spray where the fog bank pressed against the cliff, and for the last 10 feet of descent, the object did not appear. I set the bird on the scrub, motors winding down, and my knees felt heavier than they should after a simple hover. I reviewed the footage in the field before packing up because anyone who flies knows how quickly memories rearrange themselves. The file was there on the SD card, last clip timestamped precisely. I scrubbed to the minutes where the object appeared above the clouds. The initial frames showed the bright speck, solid and steady. I advanced frame by frame to the part where I'd panned up and it vanished. The scrub bar jumped exactly where I remembered. Then, where I'd seen it appear behind the drone, the video played a clean sky. There was no object behind the aircraft. For the briefest fraction of a second, the image stuttered, just one frame of undecipherable noise. Then the clip resumed with the drone's tail and scrubland and the rest of the flight, no mirror glint behind my craft. I replayed it, rewound, zoomed the image. Nothing. The audio feed, thin wind and prop hum was intact. No extra chirps captured on the microphone except the one soft beep my controller had made when the text arrived. Back home that night, I put the SD card in my laptop and ran it through the editor. Again, the same sequence. There, gone. Then a clean sky where my eyes remembered light sitting inches behind the drone. I pulled the log files from the controller. GPS consistent, no sudden yaw jumps, battery behavior normal. The phone's service log showed a 3-second no service at the exact time the object appeared behind the drone in my goggles. The paradox was small and big at once. The recorded pixels didn't match the lived view through the goggles. I kept the footage and I kept the logs. I told a friend, Mike, about it over the phone, and he laughed and called me a drama pilot. I didn't argue. What could you say without sounding ridiculous? That your own eyes and the machine's recorded eyes don't agree? That a bright coin of light played hide and seek with your drone in a way that made you hold your breath? In the days after I found myself driving past that cliff slower than before, sometimes I would stop and look up at the clouds and imagine a tiny mirror far above them, catching the last of the sun and then deciding, quietly, without sound, to move. I didn't fly again from that spot for a week. When I did, I went during the afternoon and stayed low, keeping the bird between me and the ocean, like distance would make things less weird. People ask what I think it was. I don't have an answer. The recorded evidence is clean and rational. My memory insists on an afterimage that doesn't exist on any frame. For all I have, it's a small, odd thing, a bright reflection, a second where the air rearranged how it showed itself to me, a moment where technology and perception didn't line up. I filed the clips, logged the telemetry, and kept flying elsewhere. But sometimes, when the sun hangs low and a cloud bank sits like a blank ceiling, I still look up, half expecting a coin of light to catch and wink. The lightning came at first like a camera flash. White, terrible, and all at once. And in that single instant, I saw something I couldn't have believed if my own eyes hadn't shown it to me. We were all in the living room. I had the sliding glass door cracked against the rain, Jen with a throw over her knees, and the kids, Nate and Hannah, on the floor building a Lego tower in flashes of pale light. The radio was on low, the evening news reading off a warning about a line of storms moving in from the west. The house smelled like popcorn. The dog, Otis, had worked himself into a tight roll behind the couch and was breathing in staccato pants. I'd been watching the road because I had to go into town in the morning, and I like to know whether the county's going to be slick. The line on the weather map looked like someone had scrawled a fist across it. I said out loud, "That looks bad." Exactly the sort of thing you say to make the moment ordinary. Nobody answered. We all watched the first bolt spit across the sky. When the flash hit, it wasn't the expected fork down the clouds. It poured across the whole horizon, a sheet of white that made the inside of the house seem like twilight. For half a heartbeat, the yard and the tops of the maples were so bright I could see every wet leaf. I could also see, just above the trees, something enormous and silver, like a hull, sections of it reflecting the lightning in clean, flat planes. It seemed to hover just beyond the tree line, larger than our house by so many times it made my brain blunder to scale. Square and smooth, a mass of panels without a single red or navigation light, and no sound at all. It was the way the thing was there and obvious and then gone that made my head work like a machine trying to reconcile two images. One frame with a huge metallic shape over the trees, the next frame nothing but rain and leaves. The flash itself lasted less than a second. My first move was stupidly practical, reach for my phone. The lock screen showed the time and a smear of rain. When I unlocked it, the camera app hung for a beat. I fumbled to press record, but the image I saved later was only the same lightning-stained tree line. No hull, no panels, no bright metal. My fingers shook more than I like to admit. Before that bolt, there had been other odd things. The wind had been wrong, too gusty, then oddly hollow like someone had sucked the air out of the street. The neighbor's porch light flickered twice and then stayed on. I remember thinking how strange that was because that lamp usually goes out with a wet bulb and never comes back on until morning. The street around us felt emptier than it should at the edge of a storm. No headlights in the distance, no bicyclist fighting the rain home. Otis had been extra alert. He got up from the couch when the first cloud bank roared and trotted to the sliding door, head cocked. When the flash lit the yard, he flattened like a beaten thing against the rug. We all said nothing at first. Jen put a finger under my chin like she used to when the kids were little and they were about to fall asleep. It was some subconscious plea for normality. The kids were still blinking from the flash, Lego bricks slipping from Nate's fingers. "What was that?" Hannah asked. Her voice was small, I could not say. The TV kept the storm line plodding across its map, but the bulletin tone faded into the background. I tuned to the window because people do that automatically. Look again to find a pattern. 2 minutes after the first flash, the thunder was still talking its rolling talk, and then there was a three-quarter light bolt, closer, taller, and for the second time that night, the sky alighted. The thing wasn't where it had been. In the second flash, the trees simply glowed wet and skeletal. Whatever had been there during the first lightning was gone. More than gone. There was an abruptness to the absence, a punctuation like someone closing a book in the middle of a sentence. Then something else unnerved me. On the radio, which had been a dull hiss beneath the news crawl, a faint note threaded through the static. You couldn't call it music or speech. It was like an instrument tuned below hearing, just enough to make the bones behind your ear feel crowded. When I tuned the radio dial, the tone bent and shortened, and then, weirdest of all, the static vanished. It stopped raining. Not a gradual taper. One instant there was a downpour, then the rain just stopped hanging in the air. The window was still beaded, but there were not new drops sliding down the glass. The thunder cut off mid-growl, no rupture, no crash, just the world holding its breath. The street outside, which had been a fuzzy wash of headlights and rivulets, went quiet and near blind within a second. You could see the clouds move, but the weather itself had folded away like a sheet. Otis made a noise when the rain stopped, an animal noise, not quite a bark. The kids started fidgeting, unsure whether to be relieved or terrified. We checked the displays because it's an adult reflex to verify. Power stayed on. The clock on the microwave lit steady. The router blinked happily. My phone had a single bar but no new messages. I half expected the emergency weather service to chirp, then explain the glitch and apologize for scaring us. The crawl continued on the TV as if nothing had happened. Severe storms moving through, then a movement of the map that did not match what we had felt. I left the light on and unlocked the sliding door. Outside, the air was unbearably still. The normal post-storm smell of ozone and wet dirt hung on the edges of houses 2 blocks over, but the strip of trees lining our yard seemed to be holding a shadow like a hand held over them. I called out to Jen like it would make sense. "You saw it too, right?" And she nodded, mouth tight. She had been looking at the same place where the metallic thing had been, without seeing it this time, and that look of her face, sharp, closed, stayed with me. We debated calling someone. Who do you call? The airport? The police? The sheriff would write it down, put it in a log, and call us tomorrow if anybody else had seen anything. The airport might ask for coordinates. The kids were quiet in a way I had not heard them quiet before. Nate curled up under the throw like he was compressing himself into something small and safe. Hannah asked if it was a spaceship. I didn't say no, and I didn't say yes. It felt pointless to try and locate language for a thing that had been visible for a single heartbeat and then gone. Once the cloud mass cleared enough for normal rain to resume, the forecast on the TV said there had been a sudden cell collapse, localized and quickly dissipated. The word anomaly appeared in a string of meteorology gobble 2 beats later and then moved on. It didn't capture the sight of panels like sheet metal reflecting lightning in a cut, geometric way. It didn't account for the stillness that followed. The next morning we went out because sleep doesn't fix the tightness in your chest, and sunlight has a way of making things less impossible. The yard was ordinary: puddles, flattened leaves, a torn strip of bud left by the wind. The tree line wore no marks, no scalded bark, no singe, no pattern of crushed canopy. The neighbor's porch light, which had winked during the storm, was back on its normal timer as if someone had not thought to be strange. I checked a few things I shouldn't have to check in the literal world. The FAA website for NOTAMs, a local plane spotter forum, even a webcam from the weather station across the county. Nothing showed a craft, nothing reported engine noise. A few people in a thread said they'd seen a bright flash and then calm. Some used other words. Mostly people posted photos of unusually dramatic lightning, and then the commenters talked about how beautiful it was. It felt odd and low-level, like a bruise on your mind, to see your own perception reduced to beautiful. I kept looking at the footage we had on my phone. The one clip where I thought I had the best chance of catching it only showed the trees and the rain, and for the briefest half-second, an overexposed streak where the lightning had been. If the thing had any intention of being recorded, it did not show it. Not a single clear pixel of a metallic panel. part of me kept thinking about mirrors, that this thing, whatever it had been reflecting the lightning the way a slick body of water does. But a barn roof or a plane would have other artifacts, engines, radio chatter, heat. By the afternoon, the storm system had moved east, and the weather map agreed with what we felt, a hole of calm in the center of a line that otherwise marched on. People went out to sweep porches and assess gutters. Conversations that would have taken 2 hours were compressed into a few sentences about who had lost power and who had not. Life reordered itself around ordinary problems. Credit card notices, dentist appointments, the stray cat that kept visiting our back step. And yet, when I caught a reflection in the cupboard door, when I heard a distant car stop at the corner, the memory of that bright panel over the trees crept back like fog. I have never been an especially superstitious person. I sleep with a lamp on sometimes, because the dark keeps a conversation going in my head. That night, I slept badly with the television playing as white noise because the silence after the lightning had become a thing I couldn't get out of my ears. We never did get a call from aviation authorities. No news vans drove down our cul-de-sac. The footage I had, grainy, honest, showed nothing the second time lightning struck. The kids didn't ask again after a week. The rawness of their curiosity folded back into cartoons and soccer practice. Jen washed the dishes and hummed a song I didn't know the name of. I kept the blinds open a little after that, like making a small offer to the sky. I was looking, but I didn't expect an answer. Sometimes, when a storm is rolling in and the clouds look like the dark underbellies of whales, I'll sit at the glass and wait. It's small and human and mostly stupid. But the world is made of small habits. I watch until the first jagged white, hoping my eyes will find again what they once saw. And each time the bolt snaps across the sky, I think about scale and light, and how a thing that large could be there and silent, and then not be there at all. I don't have a neat ending to this. We live on the same block with the same trees, children on the scooters they always ride, and the dog still chases the same lazy raccoons. There is no recorded conversation, no radar blip, no official bulletin that explains the way the lightning showed me that mass over the trees, and then showed me nothing. The only thing that changed is small. The way I pause when the storm warning tone plays, the way my hand finds Jen's in the sudden brightness, as if the two of us are making sure whatever we saw is still mutual. The first light I noticed go out was the one on the far side of the barn, the one that faces the field. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee, and the security monitor split 3 ways on the laptop. Feed from the driveway, feed from the barn, feed from the back paddock. Because nights this time of year, I like to keep an eye on things. It was late October, damp and dark, and the house felt the same as it always did. Wood stove ticking, the dog's Snickers at my feet, the old radio playing a talk show low in the background. The barn light blinked off at 11:17. Not a slow dim or a stutter, just off. I watched the pixel on the monitor go from bright to black like someone switching it off. I assumed a bulb had died or the motion sensor had timed out. I kept sipping my coffee. 10 minutes later, the light above the tack room, the one closest to the driveway, went out. Then 5 minutes later, the flood on the roofline nearest the house went off. When the house light, the one on the porch, went dark, my coffee went cold in my hand. I get by on routine. I'm Ben Carter, 46, own this plot with the barn and the handful of maple trees. Been here since my dad handed me the deed in '09. I know my wiring, and I know what a dead bulb looks like. So I did the reasonable thing. I grabbed my jacket, Snickers' leash, and went to walk the property. Outside, it was quieter than it should have been. There are usually frogs down by the wet little drainage pond, some trucks on the blacktop every hour, a neighbor's rooster at first light. Little life sounds that remind you there's a world out beyond your yard. That night, the air was thick with damp, and there was no noise but the scrape of gravel under my boots. Snickers paused at the run-in to the pasture and gave that soft, puzzled whine she gives when a stranger drives by. She didn't pull me toward the barn the way she usually does when raccoons are at the feeder. She just stood there looking at the barn as if waiting for something to happen. I walked in the light of the remaining porch lamp and checked the bulbs. Everything I could reach looked fine. The filaments whole, sockets snug. The barn's breakers tripped? No. The main panel was green and quiet. I tested the porch flood. It came back on when I flipped the switch, which told me I wasn't going to solve anything by swapping out bulbs mid-November in a cold drizzle. I went back to the house and sat with Snickers on my lap, telling myself not to treat a light outage the way people treat a creak in their attic at 2 a.m. Still, I pulled the footage up on the laptop again. I replayed the barn clip back at half speed. The light flashed a brief gray jitter just before the frame went black. The feed resumed 1 second later and the light was off. I scrubbed forward. On the next camera, the tack room light did the same thing. A momentary wash of overexposure, like someone aimed the camera at something very bright, and then the camera blinked to black for a split second. When it came back, the bulb was off. Every time I moved to the next clip, the pattern was the same. Flicker, 1 frame black, bulb out. That's when I noticed the pattern. The lights went dark in a sequence that matched the way you'd walk from the far field toward the house. Field light first, roofline flood, tack room, then porch. It was like something was moving closer to the house, turning lights off as it went. Calling in a repairman for an emergency at 1